Orada, Cynhorfod Sue Shotter Ydw i. Good morning. My name is Councillor Sue Shotter and I am the Chair of the Council. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, which is a hybrid meeting, with a translation facility available. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live stream fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available following the conclusion of the meeting through the Council's website. For members in the chamber, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. For those attending remotely, please use the raise hand function. Committee members who attend remotely are required to leave the camera on throughout the debate and when voting to maintain the integrity of the decision making. If you do leave the meeting for a short period, pop a message in the chat function and then let us know when you return. I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers and anyone in the public gallery. Moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, apologies for absences. Sally Pritchard, Committee Service Officer, are there any apologies?
Yeah, just one apology from Councillor Les Roberts.
Agenda item 2, declaration of interest, Code of Local Government Conduct. Members reminded that they must declare the existence and nature of the declared personal interest. Any declarations? Ryan?
Diolch yn fawr, I've got a Prif Weithredwr Chief Executive. Just to declare on behalf of all the Chief Officers in relation to item 11, as they are specifically in relation to pay Chief Officers, we will be leaving for that item, but I can assure you there will be officers here to advise. We won't leave you here alone. So we will have the Deputy Monitoring Officer and a representative from HI. So.
Any other declarations, members? Okay, moving on to agenda item 3, any urgent matters. I have one, which is item 3I, revised recommended budget 2025 to 2026, council tax and associated resolution. Members, you will have received this report, which amends the budget recommended by Cabinet following Cabinet meeting on Tuesday this week, 25th of February. As Chair of the Council, if I am of the view that a matter by reason of special circumstances should be considered as a matter of urgency, I can allow this item to be considered at this meeting. The special circumstances in this case is the recent announcement of additional grant monies that has allowed Cabinet to reconsider its recommendation to Council in respect of the 2025-2026 revenue budget. And therefore this item should be considered at this meeting in all the circumstances. The reason I've given for allowing this item to be considered as a matter of urgency will be recorded in the minutes of this meeting. The revised report will be considered under item 9, recommended budget 2025-2026 council tax and associated resolution. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, minutes of the council to approve as correct record the minutes of the council held on 30th of January 2025, pages 4 to 9. Members, you've all had an opportunity to look at the minutes. Can I remind members that the minutes are for accuracy only and not for debate? Members, do I have a proposer? Councillor Gronwy and Councillor Charlie as a seconder. Members, we have a proposer and a seconder. If we can now go to the vote by show of hands in the chamber and on Zoom. Any against? Any abstentions? Members, that's been passed. Okay, agenda item 5, to receive any announcements from the chairperson, leader, members of the cabinet or the chief executive. Are there any announcements? Councillor Charlie?
Diolch yn fawr, the part pawb. Members will be glad to hear a little bit of good news. You'll be aware Welsh Government made some announcements about it's not part of this budget that there would be some additional revenue monies coming forward to allow additional spend on our roads. I received an email last night that the indicative amount for Conway over the next 2 years will be around £5 million, but there's some detail to be worked out there. But clearly, we know many of our roads require better maintenance than we've been able to carry out over the years. So I think that's really good news. We'll also say, York.
Councillor Charlie, any other announcements? Nope. Okay, members, we'll move on to agenda item 6. To answer the questions under Council Procedure Rule number 14.2, there are no questions. And agenda item 7, Capital Strategy and Treasury Management Strategy 2025 to 2026, pages 10 to 37, and recommendations can be found on page 11. Councillor Charlie McCoubrey, Leader of Conwy Council, will present this agenda item. Diolch, Councillor Charlie.
Okay, diolch, Cadeirydd. Yes, members, this is quite a technical report. It comes to full council every year. There are three strands to it: the capital strategy, the treasury management strategy, and the investment strategy. So essentially, the capital strategy is the rules around where we purchase assets. That's anything that lasts over a year. So it could be fleets, buildings, etc. And there are clear rules in there about how much we can borrow, what we can spend it on, and a clear democratic process as to how that's approved. Clearly, when you buy something, there's a revenue to pay that borrowing off. So part of that treasury management strategy is to make sure that we have sufficient funds put aside to pay for that through its lifetime. Within that, again, I'll use the mortgage analogy. We know there are opportunities to change loan rates. It's quite a complex process. Sometimes you can have a short-term loan, which is a better interest rate. A longer-term loan, you may have some more security. So we have very, very professional officers who look to ensure that the interest payments that fall as a burden this council are kept to a minimum. And the third part then is there are times in the year when we have sort of cash flow. We have monies that have not been committed yet. And again, as any sensible household does, you want to place that where you can earn the most interest. Now, as I say, we are very lucky with the officers we have, but where necessary, they do seek expert advice to make sure that their investments, their lending is prudent. So the full details are in the appendices, members. But on that note, I'm happy that if there's any questions, I suspect it'll have to be an officer that takes it, but I'll move the recommendations on 2.2. Thank you.
Dear Councillor Charlie. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Mike Smith. Okay, members, we have a proposed and seconder. Are there any questions? No. Okay, then let's go down to the vote. If we have no questions, we have proposed and seconder. If we can show by show of hands in the chamber and on Zoom, please. Any against? Any abstentions? That's being carried. Okay, thank you, members. Moving on to agenda item 8, proposed capital programme 2025 to 2026, pages 38 to 181. Recommendation can be found on page 39. Councillor Charlie McCoubrey will present this item. Diolch.
Okay, apologies, Chair, I had a little bit of IT issues there. So again, as with the previous report that's come through, clearly when we borrow money, there is consequences to that in terms of the interest payment. We've been acutely aware of the last number of years of the need to keep that to a bare minimum. But clearly, I will use my house analogy again, there are essential repairs that need to be done. If you don't fix the tile on the roof, it gets more expensive. So every year we work really, really hard to make sure that these are up the bare minimum, cognizant of the interest payments that fall on our revenue budget. So to be clear, that is factored in the budget proposals that will come forward for members' approvals after this. So the recommendation is that we approve a capital programme that's just over £16 million, net of the actual specific grant funding. Again, often when we spend money, it attracts significant grant funding. A really good example would be our coastal defences, where we've invested £80 million to keep thousands of our households safe. This has gone through our democratic processes through scrutiny, but the appendices are there with all the areas of spend. I think a really significant one is a substantial investment of 5.5 million in our fleet replacement vehicles. We've seen sort of aging fleet and cost associated with that. We will again next year have to look to spend a similar amount, because clearly these are expensive things and they're incredibly important to our residents' share. So I will open it up to any questions from members, but I will move the recommendation in 2.2 to recommend a capital programme 16.025 million for 2025 for council's approval. And that includes previously agreed commitment of 1.655 million, as noted in paragraph 4.6 of Appendix 1. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Charlie, I've got proposed. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Nige Smith. Members, are there any questions? Councillor Tom?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thank you for that, Leader. I appreciate that you're saying that the debt that we're taking on this year is some 16 million, but from my understanding, the net cost of that loan over the period going up to 2030 could be as high as £62.5 million. I'm really concerned that taking on that level of debt and the interest that will come from that will pile on additional pressure in the years to come that will inevitably need to be met by increasing council tax further. I do accept that a chunk of that money is going to come from the Welsh Government, but large portions of it won't. And I'm just concerned about the interest payments related to that. So I just wanted to make that comment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just bring in Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It is something we're very cognizant on moving forward, but just to give reassurance that that money is factored into the revenue. It's around an additional £1 million, and that is in the budget. So that money's put to one side, so that we have the money to pay the loan over the lifetime of the asset.
Dear Councillor Charlie. Do I have any other questions, members? Councillor Simon?
Yeah, Diolch, Chair. I remember last year in the budget, we decided to take out a loan to do our road repairs. I'm wondering if the Cabinet will consider that whether that, if that has been taken out to do that work, whether we should be using some of the new incoming money to pay off that loan.
We'll just bring in Councillor Charlie. Do you want to reply to that one?
I think I'll need Amanda to take that one, Chair. Thank you.
Dear Councillor Charlie. Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the new money that's coming in, actually, what Welsh Government are doing is giving us the power to borrow. So effectively, they're not giving us a grant. What they are giving us is money into our revenue budget, which will allow us to repay the borrowing on the money we will have to borrow to do the repairs. So there isn't an ability to, as you say, pay off and effectively not increase the road repairs. So our existing programme will continue, and then that will add a further £5 million of repairs into the programme, and we'll be given the money to pay the borrowing effectively.
Dear Amanda. Any other questions, members? Councillor Gareth?
Just following on from that, Amanda, following our experience with some of the crump schemes where the amount of finance the government are offering us is at a fixed rate of interest, is that the same with the road repair money? Are we going to be subject to the whims of the markets then, as to, are we bearing the interest rate risks, or are we able to fix that so that we just cover it off so that we're not exposed to interest rate risks?
Dear Councillor Gareth. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. What I can confirm is the offer, the grant offer that we've had from Welsh Government is based on a PWLB rate of 5.5%, which is at the point they gave us the offer. Obviously, to the extent we borrow at a different rate, then we are exposed to that interest rate risk, and that's made clear in the offer from Welsh Government. I think in the context of the point you're raising about lessons learned from the past, I think we'll be looking to secure a loan as quickly as possible to ensure we're getting it at the same rate that we're getting the borrowing on, to minimise that risk.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other questions, members? Okay, we've got a proposer and a seconder. We can now go to the vote by show of hands in the chamber and on Zoom, please. Any against? Any abstentions? That's been carried, members. Diolch yn fawr. Okay, agenda item 9. This is the revised recommended budget 2025 to 2026, council tax and associated resolutions, pages 182 to 426. Councillor Charlie McCoubrey will present this agenda item. Diolch, Councillor Charlie.
All right, thank you. A few technical issues there. So yeah, again, members, my predecessor, Sam Rowlands, it always sticks to me, he said that this is the most important meeting of the year. Our role as elected members is to set a balanced budget, essentially a balanced budget that allows us to carry out our statutory duties and as far as we can to protect those services that our residents most value. Clearly, that's become increasingly difficult. It's really disappointing despite all our best efforts and for reasons I'll go into later that once again, we are asking our residents to pay a level of council tax which is far higher than we're comfortable for. That's been exacerbated by, quite frankly, an outrageous increase of 27% in water rates from a company which apparently is not for profit. And we have further increases in energy costs from companies which definitely aren't not for profit. So that will exacerbate that problem. We all acknowledge, and everybody knows, that council tax is the most unfair tax of all. It impacts on our poorest residents the most. And whilst we do some mitigation in terms of council tax reduction, which again we'll cover later, we know it's the people just above that who really suffer. But the thorny problem that we have to wrestle with is the people who most need our help and those who most struggle to pay council tax. And that's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. And it gets increasingly difficult as every year goes by. We know residents sometimes are actually bewildered as to why their taxes gone up when they seem to get less services. So I think before I actually go through our own budget this year, it's just useful, I think, to look at how we've arrived, where we arrived over the years with local government. So this really terrifies me. I had to put a slideshow together. It's not what I do, but just give me 1 second. I'll get it up my screen. Apologies. Sorry, members. I can't speak into the mic and look at it at the same time, which is difficult. Okay. So basically what I've done here is just sort of look at where the money goes. Our residents will say time and time again, we pay this tax, where does it go? So the first slide here is on an all Wales level from the turn of the century. Hopefully you can see what the different colours mean. We have education as our bigger spend. You'll notice that in the early part of the century, it went up. We then had a period of relative stability in the sort of 2010s. Interest rates, we know, were at a record low then. And then we noticed in the last number of years, there's been a real upshoot. Below that, we have social services. Again, if you look way back to 2001, the gap between social services spend and our other services was minuscule. You've seen now as we move into the end of the graph 24, there's a huge gap there. So we've been, for both of those, we know in education, a lot of that is around interest rates, teachers' pay, staffing numbers is one of the biggest costs, but I think 48 of us are school governors. We know we're seeing a real increase in complexity of need with children with additional learning needs, which is putting real pressures on our schools. I think the long shot of COVID has caused significant harm to lots of young people. And again, that will be something that we have to deal with moving forward. And social care, it's a vitally important. We have 670 residents we look after in our care homes. We actually deliver 11,500 hours a week for domiciliary care. Now, the role that plays in supporting the NHS is absolutely huge. And I think it often goes largely unrecognised. That's something that we do. And it's interesting, people often say, well, why is council tax rates higher or gone up higher than England? Well, they're capped in England, but it's also worth noting that within Wales, domiciliary care is capped at £100 a week. Across the border in Chester, it's £500 a week. So there's a £1,600 differential there, which, essentially falls on our budget as a whole. We know across Wales in the current year, the actual pressures on social care, I'm not going to call it an overspend because it's demand led, equates to £104 million. The estimate next year is that will increase to £223 million. Now, that is reflected both in our in-year spend and in what we're having to put into our budget moving forward to meet that demand. In terms of our children looked after, in the last 15 years, there's been a 79% increase in the number of children looked after across Wales. We're seeing really significant societal changes. We live in a very difficult sometimes fractured world. But it is absolutely right and proper that they are the most vulnerable in our society and that we look after them and care for them as best we can. I'm incredibly proud of the work our social services does. Members who attended the scrutiny committee the other night will have seen what they're doing to try and mitigate. We should be very proud of our family centres. Again, these aren't universal across Wales. In fact, many of the services that we do and the things that we offer are trailblazing for Wales. So we should be very, very proud of that. But there is a real issue around who pays for social care. I've said many times at the inception of the NHS, social care didn't really exist. So it wasn't included as free at the point of use. And that's something that successive governments have just kicked down the road, that these really vulnerable individuals who require care basically fall on council's budget. And as that increases, that gets increasingly difficult, as you can see in these figures on the screen here. We need a national care system, and that's absolutely obvious. But that again is out of our hands. You know, we have to deal with what we have to deal with. But then if you move down to sort of the lower figures here, we've got some things here that residents really value: local environmental services, roads and transport, libraries, culture, sport and recreation, planning and economic development, law and order. You'll see that they essentially have flatlined. So with inflation, there's less and less being spent on those services that residents kind of expect to be paid for by the council tax. So they are right in that less has been spent on those, but it's really, really clear that that money is now going to statutory services. So just kind of take a visual image of that. We'll click on Conwy next. So, you know, you'll see again, it is living in a goldfish bowl sometime within Conwy, but you can see that this is broadly exactly identically the same sort of pattern. And if we move on to the next slide, sorry, we'll look at where the budget comes from here. So the top line is the money that we receive from Welsh Government. I think what's really interesting, if you look at the bottom two lines, the amount to be collected from council tax is pink. We'll essentially see that that's gone up year after year. Actually, just the next one's sort of Conwy, that's all Wales. So yeah, sorry, again, pretty much the same trajectory. But you'll note sort of back at the turn of the century, the actual amount that was contributed by business rates was actually equal to council tax. That gap has grown massively. So business rates have stayed flat. And again, there may be good reasons for that. Economic development, essentially, not wanting to stifle that. But the percentage that contributes from business rates has gone down. And you can see that the contribution from council tax has gone up significantly year on year. Conwy, the next one, please. Sorry. Oh, sorry, back on my apologies. Sorry. So again, with Conwy, the trajectory is the same. I think it's fair to say Conwy has risen a bit steeper. If we look back to 2013, we were the third lowest council tax. Historically, it was very low when this authority was set up in '96. So in some respects, you have a bit of catching up to do if you're taking less per capita. We know historically Conwy has and continues to have a poor settlement. But I think the point I'd make is just you've seen the same sort of trajectory where more and more of local government services are being funded by taxpayers. So next slide, please. Again, when we look at other organisations, member will be aware of the report Welsh Audit did, really, really concerning report into the financial sustainability of local government. Next slide. Within that, there was a section about how councils are funded. If you look at paragraph 77, which I'll read out, between 2005 and 6, the earliest year comparative data is available. Between 22-23, real term council spending increased by 11%. In comparison, over the same period, the Welsh NHS programme budget grew by 60% in real terms. So there's a really, really significant differential in how we've been funded and how the NHS has been funded. Next slide, please. And again, if you look at the sort of bigger picture, this is kind of percentage budget. You know, there's two main areas of spend for Welsh Government, which is local authorities and the NHS. We are essentially the delivery arms. You'll see that over this period, the actual amount of the budget's gone up from 34%, 49%, and that will creep over 50% this year. Now that picture is the same across the whole of the UK, where that extra money is going to the NHS, I think, at the detriment to our funding. And it's clear for politicians, you know, there'll be a bun fight over who's spending the most in the NHS. They're really proud of that. We're putting more money in. Unfortunately, nobody seems to fight the fight for local government. There's nobody saying what they're investing in us, which, you know, is really, really challenging, especially when we have these arguments as to who's paying for who. That is really, really difficult. So just next slide, please. So here's the most controversial bit of all, which is council tax rises. So this is the whole of Wales. I'm sure Gromby can fill us in. We'll just kind of look at that pattern, members, and then we'll go on to Conwy. Okay, so again, the pattern's broadly similar in terms of each year, where it's been high, where it's been low. We've seen some real turmoil in the early years of councils. Council tax rates as high as 14%, 13%. There's then a period in the middle where, again, with low inflation, where it looks relatively stable. And then we're into the era where we're all very familiar with. But looking at those, you know, I've looked at all those budgets. Sorry, just before we move on, I mean, Conwy again tracks pretty much identically, slightly higher, again, as I said, with our lower base and our lower settlement, but you know, it's within the same ballpark. And what's interesting about how they match is how we set our budgets. You know, we don't just sit down and decide we want to spend X. Every authority in Wales has got to put forward a balanced budget. They've got to look at the demand and the need, and then there's a gap. And give or take better funding formulas, et cetera, reserves. Everybody's essentially within a very similar position. So we have a period of stability there where council tax was kept around the 5%. It's really interesting when you look at those budgets. I've kind of gone through pretty much all of them. They were clearly really, really challenging. There was a de facto cap on council tax at 5% up until 17-18. But when you look at the detail of those budgets, I'll just go through 2014, 2015. Council tax was 5%, but there were £8.4 million of cuts. And the balance were £4 million of reserves. Now, council tax, the percentage would have collected back in the day was a lot lower than it is now. You're probably looking about, for the balance without reserves, well over 14%, maybe 15%, I mean, crazy numbers. 2015, 16, 5% council tax, £10 million of cuts, £3.47 million. To balance, 2016, 2017, 5%, £8.8 million of cuts, £2.7 million. In 2017, 4.6, I think that was an election year, 9.4 million cuts and £2.4 million of reserves. And I want to be very clear, I'm not criticising anybody who brought that budget forward, because when you read the reports, say it's exactly the same pressures that we face today. And I think within that, they've absolutely done their best. Now, clearly going out with 15, 16% council taxes would be absolutely crazy. So though they've used the reserves, but we know reserves can only be used once. By the time I arrived in this council in 17-18, we had the lowest reserves in Wales, which has had really significant impact on how we faced the sort of crisis of the last 3 years. But it's clear from those reports, you know, people are absolutely trying to do their best. We move on then to 2019-20. I mentioned my predecessor, Sam. This is a budget that he delivered. That in recent times is actually the highest rate of council tax rise, because the fire levy was considerably lower. It was actually 9.03%. And it is easy to criticise budgets. It's easy to look back and go, you should have made some changes. There's a £16 million gap there. In context, over the last 3 years, we've been facing £30 million gaps. That included a 4% cut to school and actually use of £1 million of reserves to balance, and £8.6 million of cuts. Again, though, read the report. You know, it's really, really difficult. It's really difficult to stand up here and to have these figures of council tax, have these levels of cuts. And I think we need to kind of be mindful of that, of how difficult that is, and decisions that other people have made in the past. We then move into council tax has rocketed down. I joined the cabinet in 2019. This is the COVID period. Again, there's nothing big and clever here. We were properly funded during COVID. We did some incredible work with our communities. We handed out about £80 million, of business support. We kept people safe and well. And, you know, it was a very, very difficult time for us all, but from a professional point of view, we could concentrate on the job and we could look at helping people. We got homeless people off the street. It was, you know, a really, really, from a council perspective or from a member's perspective, a positive time to work. So we were able to balance again, what's the gap? That there was no cuts to schools, there was minimal cuts to other services. We were able to balance, I think it was 2.95. That was below the Welsh average. And again, with hindsight, you'd look back and go, that should have been higher. You know, there should have been more money put in. The next year was just 3.95%. Again, hindsight, should have done more, et cetera, et cetera. But the scale of the budget challenge we faced coming into the new term was £6 million. And we all know then, 3 years ago, the whole world, everything went slightly crazy, didn't it? We had a massive increase in inflation, up to 11%, huge increases in fuel, huge increases in demand, a really, really difficult time. And again, that's reflected in those council tax figures that are there. If you look at the national picture, councils that have been able to reduce that have got massive reserves. They've been able to utilize those. Again, it's, you know, we know it's not a solution, but it's very different. If you've got £190 million squirreled away, you're in a much better position to kind of ride that out to a certain extent. But it's clear, first year we were exposed very much like the situation in 2019-20 when it was 3% above the average. And we've continued to struggle over the last 2 years despite our very, very best efforts. So I think it's very, very clear from that essentially that everyone doing a budget faces the same challenges. It's about how do you close that gap. You know, every authority is essentially to a certain extent in the same situation. So we will look now to move to our own budget for the year coming forward. I want to start by offering my sincerest thanks to Amanda. You'll be aware there was an announcement of some additional money on Thursday, the 20th. Normally we get our budget figure before Christmas. It's very rare there's any substantial changes in that. We were aware there was going to be a little bit of additional money from a floor up from 3.6 to 3.8, but there was some additional funding for social services. Amanda worked all weekend to bring these other reports forward to you. And I absolutely recognise that the adjustment down from a combined rate of 9.4, 8.95 is small comfort, but I've always made the case, and I think it's actually clear from the figures, that we are collecting council tax to support statutory services. If we get additional funding to support those services, then for me it's right and proper that we should look to reduce that as much as we can. So moving on to the actual report itself, I'll take members on to page 11. So when we look at the democratic trail here, we have a really, really rigorous scrutiny functions in this council. Councillor Sherrill, Leader of the Opposition, a very experienced councillor, cabinet member in social care, chairs that committee. She makes sure that everything has a really good airing. We have quarterly updates on our revenue spend, quarterly updates on our capital spend. We also have every service has performance reviews twice a year. The budget is a standing item on those, so every member can come along and ask questions and be informed of where we're up to with that budget. But in terms of the formal process of how we present the budget through to today, it's set out in 3.4. Those are the actual meetings where people have an opportunity to discuss and scrutinise what's there. So we'll move on to page 12, the final government settlement. Our initial funding was 3.6, which is uplifted to 3.8. So that was 14th out of the 22 local authorities in Wales. Clearly, that's a big improvement from last year when we were joint bottom. I've worked really hard. We'll discuss the funding formula, I guess, later on in here, but it is pleasing to see some movement, and that's pleasing to see us go up in recognition. That was mainly around housing. The previous data was from 2013. We know our spend on housing before COVID was around 400,000. It's heading over 6 million now. So getting that data up to date was really, really important. And we are incredibly, grateful for the additional money under the previous administration. We were talking about Wales, about a 1% across Wales. We know Conwy never gets the average, so it could have been an absolutely flat settlement, which would have been, quite frankly, disastrous. And I actually fail to see how we could have balanced without this additional monies. So table 1 sets out the additional income. You'll notice in there, it's quite a bit of that money was for in-year pressures. So a lot of that was around teachers' pay, pensions, etc., which were higher than expected. But that money is in the settlement, so will continue to benefit us in years moving forward. Coastal risk management, we've spent about £80 million protecting our coastline, protecting thousands of households. We fund 15% of that from our own resources. The other 85% is funded by Welsh Government. But essentially, that's where we get a loan and they give us the money to pay that loan off. So that money is kind of already accounted for and already spent. So essentially, as we move down, there's about 3.8, an extra £8 million to actually support our pressures moving forward. But over the 2 years, essentially, it is a 7.6 increase, which we're incredibly grateful for. So if we look to our shortfall, again, the way we balance a budget is we have to make prudent and accurate as far as they can be estimates of the need of our services, the cost of delivering our services, and we have professional officers who do that. If we move to 5.8 on page 14, service pressures we estimate to be 12.458 million. So that's around demand, it's around the price of inflation, it's around increased costs of sort of like care homes and domiciliary care where they have to pay real living wage, etc., etc. And 5.9, we've submitted a business cases for 1.42. Again, that has come through the democratic process before. They are pared back to the absolute minimum. They are normally, when there's been a change of legislation, we need to comply with that. Failure to do so would result in costs to this council. New legislation, there's been new legislation about licensing of tattoo parlours, and we require extra staff to comply with that legislation. So there is 1.42 there, which again has previously come through the democratic process. 5.11 sets out pay pressures. We don't set our pay. Teachers' pay is set by Welsh Government. Teach staff, NJC, or council staff is set by UK Government. But clearly we look to make sort of prudent estimates of what that will cost. It's a fairly eye-watering £15 million to pay our officers and their staff. Details are there. We'll note in 5.12, Amanda's estimated that it would be around 4%, but the actual claim that the NJC has put forward is considerably more than that. Now, clearly, that's not been settled yet, but it's something we have to be cognizant of moving forward, that there may be additional costs there. 5.113 details the changes to national insurance. Again, members will be fully aware it's increased the actual amount, and the rate at which you have to pay it has dropped down. We still don't know how much we will get. We will know in the after the budget what amount the council will actually get. Amanda has made an estimate of what that will be. Each council is affected differently in terms of our own staff. We know we'll get it, but when you commission work out again domiciliary care, it's not clear exactly what that will be. But as always, it's a very prudent estimate from Amanda. Table 2 sets out these pressures that we have to look to meet. If we look on page 16, there's all the usual suspects in there: pay, pressures, interest rates remain stubbornly high. But if we look down at avoidable service pressures, we estimate we'll need another 2.87 million to look after our children, vulnerable children, looked after children. We've got vulnerable people, 1.76 million. Residential nursing care and domiciliary care is 4.7 million. Again, we do some incredible work supporting the NHS, making sure people are in the appropriate settings, taking them to hospital beds. A hospital bed per night's anywhere from £350 to £2,000 a night, and it's right and proper that we do that. But once again, that comes at a cost, and we have to factor that in to our budget setting process. Again, there are other details there, some positive, some negative around energy increases. But we're at a position where the shortfall is essentially 10.788 million. Page 17 refers to addressing the resource shortfall. So essentially we can look to reduce our spend or increase our resources, and that put bluntly is cuts our council tax. There is no other way we can do that. We have taken £92 million out of our budget. Further cuts gets incredibly difficult. We know in the year that passed, we've had people in here really upset that we were closing toilets. We've had people really upset we're closing libraries. But after, 15 years of austerity, there really is very, very little that we can cut, which will not have a massive impact on residents, and that remains incredibly difficult. In terms of how we look to set the budget, we had a number of budget working groups. There were potential cuts brought forward for members, which we discussed over a couple of sessions. 2.5 million of those were accepted. There were further options there, but again, along the same lines of what else you cut, they were unpalatable in the extreme. We were looking at things like getting rid of more CCTV, reducing our gridding, getting rid of our horticulture, all things that are really, really important to members. I know during the year we've had debates. Members have spoke really eloquently, but haven't they have more gridding, having better flowers? They were rejected. So we decided on what we wanted or what we were prepared to accept in terms of those cuts, those budget reductions. Schools, we had a separate meeting with schools. As I've said before, we've got 48 governors there. We're all very aware of the situation in our schools. There is a bit of an anomaly. We fund schools, but each governing body funds its own budget. Some schools are more problems than others. There's lots of factors for that in terms of the funding formula, in terms of their pupil numbers, in terms of the location, in terms of size of building. It's quite a complex world. But it's clear over the last 2 years that despite our best efforts, schools have had to make substantial savings. If we look at last year, we received a total of 2.29% increase from Welsh Government, which is 4.6 million. We actually put 3.9 million pounds into schools, which is 4.9. If we had a passported on the level of funding we received from Welsh Government, that would have been a further cut of £2 million. But it's clear the money we put in didn't meet the wages were £6 million. So schools have had to find substantial savings over the last 2 years. So we had a meeting, members heard, head teachers. I don't feel we should be taking any more money out of schools. There will be reductions because we have a falling roll, which is a real challenge for us moving forward. But this budget, the budget I'm proposing here supports schools. There will be no reduction in that net budget, and we would accept the service budget reductions that were discussed in 2.5 million. With our reserves here, again, they are still one of the lowest in Wales, which is a real concern in the volatile times we live in. There was a recommendation, Gareth, from scrutiny that we need to grow our reserves from a fiscal point of view. I absolutely agree with that. But the reality of the situation we're in is then you've got to identify further cuts or you've got to have higher council tax. Now, both of those are incredibly challenging. So whilst this budget proposes no permanent budget set aside so we can grow our reserves, we don't plan to use any of our reserves to balance this budget, because I think that would be the wrong thing to do moving forward, because that pressure just increases in the following year. Clearly, during the year where we're able to, if there's any money that we can put into reserves, we will look to do that, but we're not in a position, in my opinion, to set aside a specific formula line for that at the moment. So we looked at council tax then. The figure we need to balance has reduced a little bit, not significantly. We're looking at a council tax increase for us of 8.27%, an additional 0.68 for the fire levy for the police authority, which brings us to 8.95. So on page 21, you can see what that means in real terms to our residents. Again, this isn't the back of water increases, the back of my utility increases. So I'm not going to belittle it. I'm not going to play down the significance of it. But it is, in terms of average band D, it's £143.35 a month for the council proportion and £11.79 for the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority. I think I would point out that over the last 3 years, the Fire Authority, in order to meet its own costs, has done 2 10% rises and a 7%. They don't attract the same level of criticism we do, but clearly they face the same pressures in terms of staffing costs and inflation, etc. We have 55,800 dwellings. 21,000 of those are subject to a single person discount. And also there are around 7,700 houses who get full relief from council tax, of another 1,200 who get partial relief. So that protects our most vulnerable. I'd like to thank the members of the public who took part in our budget consultation. You know, clearly, if you ask any member of the public, they would want council tax as low as possible, as we all would. Contrary to popular belief, we all pay council tax, and we know it's really, really difficult. But the key services, you know, the most popular is not quite the right word, was education, schools, youth services, empty and bins recycling, waste disposal, supporting vulnerable people and families, adults and older people, and our swimming pools and leisure centre. Table 6 sets out where we propose to spend that money, and it's absolutely clear that aligns with the services that people most value. There will be an additional £5.963 million into our schools directly, and £1.8 million to our education services who support that. Social services, again, 14 million, but that is to meet, set a balanced budget, we have to meet that need. I think one thing I do take out of the survey, though, when we list the most popular and the least popular, I think the least popular, in inverted commas, was parks and recreation. But you actually look at the statistics of people who thought it was very important and important, it was around 74%. So clearly people value all our services. Some are more precious to some than others, but it's not really surprising after 50 years of austerity that people are fed up with cuts as much as they're fed up with council tax, and they are all incredibly important. We move on to the financial outlook beyond 25-26. You know, again, we're not lawmakers, we're not law takers. Our funding, 70% of our funding comes from Welsh government, it comes from UK government. The situation remains very volatile on the national level, we know that. One of the biggest difficulties we have as a council is this annual cycle of preparing budgets. It really highlighted in the case of this week where there's an announcement last Thursday. That's really, really challenging. It's really challenging to plan ahead. The UK government, Labour government, has said that they will look for a 3-year funding cycle, which would be really beneficial. Even if it's bad news or good news, at least you can plan ahead and do things at a sensible basis. I think that there's a tendency to stagger from one year to the next, which is not good for anybody. So that would be really beneficial. There is a huge amount of work going on behind the scenes in terms of what we've done this year and what we're planning to do next year. So after I finish, I'm going to actually ask the Chief Executive just to give a sort of background from an officer point of view about what that work is and where our focus will be. Before I finish, I want to absolutely add my thanks to our officers. Incredibly hard. They've worked. We're incredibly lucky to have such professional officers. Cabinet have been incredibly supportive, worked really, really hard. I know they're really, really respected kind of in the sort of various boards they sit in. Councillor Emily, you know, the support you've given me has been fantastic. The work you've done with Welsh Government in terms of getting funding through, you know, you can't affect the funding formula. But the work you've done in sort of TACP funding and assisting the £10 million from Venue Cymru has been really, really appreciated and really effective. I want to reflect here, you know, we look at our funding gap between us and Denbighshire, £34 million. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. You know, that has to change. There has to be an independent review of that funding formula. Even against the Welsh average, it's £3 million, and that's not a one-off £3 million. That's £3 million every year. £3 million would allow us to reduce council tax by kind of 4%. You know, we wouldn't be stood here, frankly, quite embarrassed about the level that we're asking for. Again, my mother always said self-praise is no praise, but I feel I've done more than any other leader to point out those inequities on a fairness basis, on a statistic basis, and showing why it doesn't work. And we have had some movement. We've seen that, but frankly, for the WLGA, it's like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. You know, that there is a commitment to move forward to bring the formula up to date, but that's going to take 3 years. I find that really ironic when we're all being pushed to use AI and data and speed things up, that we're still using a formula which is 20 years old. I don't think it reflects the challenges we face in society today. It certainly doesn't face the challenges we face with relative depopulation across 19 or the 22 local authorities. And it's, you know, it's creating real problems for us, real problems for our residents. But that will continue. But clearly there needs to be a much better look at that. But again, before I finish, I just want to reflect on £92 million of cuts, and nobody seems to care. And I think if we're honest, we all have to take some responsibility for that. There's 22 budgets been announced, chambers across this authority, and I can guarantee in every single one there'll be opposition stand up when this is a disgrace, that's a disgrace, you're wasting money here, you're wasting money there. You know, and we know local government is undervalued and underfunded. We don't get any support from above us. Our most ardent critics tend to be our Senate members, which is really disappointing. We'll criticise our council tax, they'll criticise the cuts. No acceptance of the fact that we are underfunded and they should be doing more to fight for us and fight for our residents. That remains incredibly frustrating. The press is good news is no longer news. It's all about negative stories, clickbait. You know, that is really, really challenging because that's all people hear. So it is difficult. It is really hard. But I think we all individually and collectively need to promote the work that local government does and the work that our officers do. They're fully aware. We've got over 4,500 employees. Most of them live in this county. You know, they see when there's not been weeding done. They see when there's potholes. They're acutely aware of that. But that's because we haven't got the money in our budgets to give them to do the work that they do. But we should be very, very proud of the work that they do. So that's a budget proposal. I'm obviously more than happy to take any questions, members, but I would just like Reen to give a sort of run through and the work that's been done to improve our situation and essentially leave no stone unturned. So diolch yn fawr.
Diolch Arweinydd a bore da pawb. Morning everyone. Yes, I'd just like to start off by thanking Amanda and the team, but also all services that have been involved in the run up to this. You know, every single service has contributed in one way or another to bring the proposal before you today. We are incredibly fortunate to have a dedicated workforce, and I'd like to thank them for all they do for the residents of Conwy. I think it's important that we understand that this is not something that's happened over the last 3 months, the budget setting. It's something that has been going on for, I think, Amanda, it's around 14 months ago that we started discussions around today. And that included a lot of preparatory work, but also bringing people in to assist us to, as the leader says, to make sure that we turn every stone. As has been pointed out, I think we all understand that it's an incredibly challenging time for the sector as a whole, and I really don't underestimate the pressure that puts on staff, on you as members, but also for the public. And I'd make the point that none of us in this room came into the sector to cut services and to raise council tax. And as professional officers, that certainly was not what we had in mind when we came into this profession. But we are where we are in terms of the position we find ourselves in, and we are doing all we can to try and address those issues. I'd also make the point that there are continual discussions regionally, there are continual discussions nationally from an officer point of view to try and find best practice. I think we had a discussion at PROSC a few weeks ago around AI, etc., and those conversations to continue. So I'd like to just give a synopsis of how we've reached here really in the work that we've done. So first of all, you'll see on the agenda today we have the corporate plan, which has been rehashed to a degree in terms of prioritising resilience, and that I think if we consider the vast majority of our time in this council, but also I would hedge a bet that the majority of leadership teams across Wales are in the same boat of prioritising resilience as part of their everyday work. And I think that's the right thing to do, isn't it? In terms of we have to make sure that we try and get through this period. So that is in terms of a strategic approach, the corporate plan is the way forward. So that's taken a lot of time for Fran, Iolo and the team to try and bring that together, and we'll have a discussion about that later on. You'll all recall that we undertook a peer review through the WLGA in 2023, and that led to an action plan being prepared, and that was approved in 2023 as a programme moving forward. However, I think we were all of the view that actually we needed to go further than that. I think I've said it a few times. I don't think the WLGA peer review said anything to us that we didn't know already, really. We wanted to go further, and we were the first authority in Wales to engage with SIPA, and we did that in December 23. We started those discussions, and they've come in to assist us, and that has had the backing of Welsh Government as well, who were fully aware of that. But I'd make the point that we probably have gone further than anyone else in that respect in trying to find a pathway through to resilience. And as part of that work, I think I should set out a little bit around what have they been doing with us, and we've seen in various reports that have come through that there've been quite a few strands of work. So and that was the basis. The original SIPA work was the basis of the resilience plan that was brought to you as members and cabinet approved in September 24. So what did we do? Well, in January 24, we set up vacancy control, and that was myself, Amanda, and Fran as head of people and performance, assessing every vacancy that comes up. So we look at them, check them, ensure that they're necessary, essential, and challenge where necessary. We established the strategic budget group, which includes myself, Amanda, Jenny, and Gareth, the head of finance, and a member of SIPA, and that was to challenge budget. So the whole process that we've come here has had, I would say, 9 months of continual discussion with services to consider their budgets, their plans, and how we get to this position. And I think that was probably an important facet as far as I was concerned, because one of my priorities this year was trying to get these proposals forward to you sooner. I think in the last 2 years, because of circumstances, it's not anything to do with anybody. You know, the changing feast that was the finance position of the past years, and meant that we've been trying to catch up really. So we had proposals earlier, and I think the strategic budget group, which was a recommendation of SIPA, was incredibly useful there. We've applied spend controls, so all spend over £1,000 goes to panel, and every spend over 25,000 comes to strategic directors and myself to approve. So those are scrutinised. We also have a procurement panel, which does the same thing in terms of assessing, considering that are we getting best value in terms of our contracts, etc. So all those have been put in. I think they came in October, if I remember correctly. So those are additional meetings, work that's gone on. You know, behind closed doors, if you like. You know, it's work we do. It's a part of our every week now in trying to control and make sure that we are fully on top of the budget. There's been specific work SIPA have undertaken with social care, children's on commissioning, and this was incredibly informative and I think was welcomed by staff, and we will look to enhance that moving forward. We've done specific work on assets, which will result in a revised asset management strategy, which I think, if I remember correctly, the date has now been put in to come to scrutiny and cabinet in May. Benchmarking work on various aspects of income and expenditure within services. Benchmarking is difficult, and it's something that we have raised with Audit Wales around consistency of data would really help the sector in general. But we've done some work on that, and we're hoping to bring some of that to democracy, actually, so that all you can see that work that has been done, and that will be in May or June. Specific work on where support staff sit within the council, and this will be further developed next year. We installed a new finance system, and we've looked at digital transformation. So a company called Triple Value Impact were commissioned to look at various options around digital, and I'll come on to that around the plans moving forward. Realigning our estate. So you'll be aware that one of the priorities, I think, in the previous budget consultation was around our estate. You'll be aware that Bodlondeb, so contracts have been exchanged on that. So we will be looking at that office accommodation strategy too, and office-based staff being located in Coedpella. The housing board, and I'm aware that there were discussions last night in scrutiny around housing and the strides we've taken there. You know, setting up that board, putting emphasis on trying to turn that very difficult problem around, and we haven't solved it at all, but great strides have been made there, and I commend anybody to look, if you haven't, on the recording of last night's meeting around emphasising the work that was done there, and that including restructuring. Of course, we're all aware that it included appointing a new head of housing, but I think we can see from the information that's been provided the fantastic work that's gone on there. Planning for 26-27 has already started with strategic budget group sessions already arranged, and you'll all be aware of the work we're doing around foster carers and looking at options there. And you will have approved the incentives that we had for foster carers. You'll see from the capital programme you've just adopted, we're investing capital to bring revenue costs down. We especially, I'll point out in terms of our fleet, because with an ageing fleet comes cost, and what we're trying to do is channel whatever capital we can are able to in order to bring those revenue costs down. So that was a priority this year. And I would make the point that we already do 4 weekly bin collections. I did have a chuckle a couple of weeks ago when it was pointed out that Bristol were going to go to 4 weekly, and they were quoting other local authorities in Wales were doing 3. Of course, we went to 4 weekly collections in 2018. So I think that gives some kind of synopsis about what we've been doing in the last 12 to 18 months. Moving forward, I think it's in the pack. So if I point you to the medium-term financial plan, and it's in Appendix 10, and that really does set out what we have in mind moving forward, and specifically on Table 3, which is on page 234. But I'll pick out some things. So there are certain works we'll be doing with SIPFA moving forward, and we're already in discussions with them, and this will build on what we've done up to date and move other things into the equation. So one of the things we're looking at, because of the demand issues that we're seeing, is social care adults. So we'll be doing a piece of work around that. Schools, we'll be looking at schools around a general piece of work, but also maybe more specific work around that. And that will tie in, I think, with work that's already been done with Welsh Government. You may be aware there's a paper now around the formula that's been published. So, you know, we'll look at how we can work with that, but also what we can do in order to assist our schools. School transport, which is another one, which is an issue, I think, across Wales. And I think my recollection is that Welsh Government will be setting up a summit to discuss that, because it's a sector-wide problem. But we will look at what we can do in Conwy on that point as well. And another very, very important aspect we'll be looking is data analysis, because I think we need to be data-led. It's incredibly important. Without the data, you're unable to really make educated decisions. So that will be a priority for us. And as I say, these will commence in the next month or so. So just to give you that comfort. Other projects, so the strategic school group will continue to work and will report back. The asset management strategy, as I said, will be coming forward in the next couple of months, especially around the disposal side of it. And that will be the first part that will come through. And then we will continue to explore options around digital. Now, you will see there's a whole list in the appendix on the medium-term financial strategy around various things. And you will see there's a whole host of digital solutions that we are looking at presently. You know, I could pick a few out: co-pilots, taking people out of debt, struggling with cost of living, using data to prevent fraud, adult dom care, around technology in homes, automation of blue badges, transport route optimization, that would include ALN, generative AI in the workplace, using the conversational AI to increase our age debt recovery, replacement of upkeys, connected care. All this stuff, everything is being looked at. And even this week, we've had conversations with other local authorities about certain things they've done, and also attended an LGA presentation about the moves that are being done in England. So I'm hoping that gives you some comfort around we are trying to turn every stone in terms of stabilising our finances. Resilience and transformation strategy, that will come through in the next couple of months. We've worked on a draft that will be before you, and we are asking SIPFA to put an eye on that, being the experts in the field. A resilience plan will be brought back to you, an update to that, and include more detail, as I said, around data and benchmarking work that SIPFA have done. And we'll also, I think we'll look at the budget working group processes as well, to look at how those work and whether we can refine them. I hope you can appreciate that whole list means a lot of work for a lot of people. And that's over and above the day job. So 3 years ago, this work probably wasn't happening. This is on top of everything else, trying to get ourselves on an even keel in terms of financial stability. So in that sense, that's why I thank staff so much, is because it is work that, you know, all of us are going through at the moment. The vast majority of our time is on this. So in that sense, I hope that gives you some comfort, and there will be reports coming through to democracy on various aspects of this in the next couple of months. So diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch, Rhyn. Can I also thank Councillor Charlie for your in-depth presentation? Can I just confirm, Councillor Charlie, that you are actually proposing this agenda item?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll propose the amendment. That's right, I propose it.
Diolch. Okay, can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Cathy. Members, we have a proposal and seconder. Are there any questions? Okay, I'm going to call in Councillor Gronwy.
Yeah, it's not particularly a question. Charlie went through some of the journeys over the years that we've been through in setting the budgets. I've been here for more or less 30 odd years. It's quite a historical day really, because this is the last time we'll be in this chamber setting a budget. So it's quite a historical day for me anyway. And we are in difficult times. Basically, it's a budget for holding the ground and survival. That's what we're faced with, surviving through this year and then going into next year, looking at all the issues, all the items that Ryan raised about transforming and looking how we can further reduce and make savings to deliver the services that our residents so much value. And I've seen the coming and going. I've seen as when we're setting extortionate council tax because we had to. And we're in the position today where we're setting a council tax that is realistic to deliver the needs of the residents of Conway. And I will support that because we have no other option basically. And unless somebody come up with a magic money tree or ways we can find additional savings, I'm happy to, it's always been seconded, that we move to the vote and adopt this council tax increase.
Diolch, Councillor Gronwy. I'm going to call in Councillor Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and could I also thank Charlie for the presentation. I've been up there, Charlie, and it's a lonely place, especially in the difficult times. I've been a councillor since 2004, and from 2004 for the few years, it was a really good place to be. I could make a difference for my communities. I had a say about where the money was spent, and then all of a sudden, austerity came in and we were managing declining budgets. I never became a councillor to make cuts or efficiencies, yes, but cuts not. You have said £92 million of cuts and efficiencies, and as Gronwy's just alluded to, that I think creating this might be our last meeting in this chamber, and down to efficiencies, this magnificent building is going, hopefully to a good home. I wanted to say we were looking, I think initially we were looking at council tax, and we had a target, Charlie, of about maybe 6% or 6% under. And then I understand, and I don't know whether the Director of Social Service could perhaps come in as well. We had another pressure hit us late on for about £1.9 million, which was fantastic. That it was assisting. My understanding is that it was assisting patients to come out of hospital and get back independent into their own homes. So if my understanding is correct, that perhaps then that assisted somewhat with Betsy with bed blocking, and if you're assisting with bed blocking, you know, that helps to reduce the pressure on A&E and wards and ambulance waits outside the hospital, etc. I understand that, but to my understanding here, that 1.9 million, if I'm correct, and I will stand corrected if need be, but that could have equated to a 2% less on council tax. So we could have been in the ballpark of around about 6% council tax on that. And can I just say that I welcome the fact that we are protecting schools from further cuts in this budget. I totally get and I totally understand. with the pressures on pupil numbers, etc., in education and in schools. I totally get that, but we all sat through, well, most of us sat through that presentation and the budget working group on schools, which was emotional for me to listen to, and I'm just really pleased that we've been able to act upon that. Having said that, also on the consultation, I think one of the top priorities was education and protecting education. So I think we can say that we have listened to our residents on that one. Yes, I would love to be in a position to say, look, here's another dollop of cash that we can give. But we all know, don't we, that the only way you can stop that gap is either increase in charges or cut in service. So it's just a question on that 1.9 million of pressure on, I believe, assisting Betsy Cadwallader, if you could answer that, please.
Yeah, thank you. As I've highlighted, pressures in social care are significant. Both they're demand led, and there's obviously significant cost to that. Betsy Cadwallader, sorry, the Welsh Government had a 50-day challenge to sort of remove people from hospital to encourage the speed at which people were moved on. It's hard to prove an absolute cause and effect, Mike, but we did have a 10% increase in the third quarter on the number of residents that we have in residential care. I think that was around 60 additional people. Now, that comes at a cost of £1.9 million. We've seen those figures gradually rise with an ageing population. Conway has got the second highest over 65s. So it is more of an issue for us just because of our demographic, but it'd be quite hard to prove cause and effect. But clearly, if we're looking after more people, it costs more money, and that does carry on to next year because clearly that need is still there. It's not a one-off spend, is it?
Dear Councillor Charlie, I'm going to call in Councillor Austin.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Cyfle chi roed eich listiau ar. Sgynna i ddim cwestiwn, jyst eisiau diolch i'r arweinydd am ei gyflwyniad greunus, os nad hirfaith, ac o'n i'n licio'r graffeg a bob peth o'n gwneud o'n syml i bobl syml fatha fi, i ddeall beth sydd bod yn mynd ymlaen ac yn y blaen. Gai hefyd diolch iddo fo i'w ymroddiad a'i ymrwymiad, hyd yn unig i'w swydd fel arweinydd, ond hefyd i'r cyngor yma ac i'r sir yma. Dwi'n hynod o falch bod gynnon ni dyn fatha fo in charge, fel maen nhw'n dweud. Gai hefyd diolch i'r Prif-Weithredwr ac i'r cyfarwyddwyr strategol, yn enwedig i Amanda am ei gwaith, ac i bob swyddog yn y sir yma sydd wedi gorfod dod i penderfyniadau anodd dros ben. Ac mae'n diolch enfawr ni iddyn nhw. Mi ydw i yn falch o ddweud, bod hwn ddim y cyllideb mwyaf perffaith, ond i ystyru beth sydd wedi digwydd yn yr wythnosau dwytha yma, a fo y pwysau ar yr adran gwasanaethau cymdeithasol, dwi'n meddwl bod yr gyllideb yma wedi troi allan yn un reit dda. Ac oherwydd hynny, dwi'n falch o ddweud, mi fydda i'n ei gefnogio.
Diolch, Councillor Austin. I'm going to call in Councillor Garrett.
Thanks very much. I'm going to have to lean across because my microphone doesn't seem to be working. I'd like to thank Charlie for the presentation and say I really appreciate the work that he does in pushing our cause and the unfairness of the funding formula with Welsh Assembly governments, and it's really, really important that we do that. I also fully take on board that he and the cabinet have worked really hard and had to make some really, really difficult choices. So when I'm criticising the budget, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. It almost feels as if I'm peering into your pram, Charlie, and telling you that you've got an ugly baby in there. And And I'm also afraid to tell you that, you know, there's a number of your colleagues and friends who've peered into the pram and they seem to think it's an ugly baby as well. It's just that they don't actually want to tell you that that's the case. And whilst I'm on that theme, you know, this is the third, in my opinion, third ugly budget that we've had since I've been on this council. The council tax increases amount to over 31%. I think today's budget is a culmination of 3 years of some poor financial decisions. It's 3 years of tinkering instead of actually changing and transforming. It's years of, you know, since I've been here, of not actually hitting our budgets, of overspending, and then actually having to draw that gap from our reserves, which were already low, as you quite correctly pointed out, and are coming from that. I think as a council, we need to look forward and actually prepare the council for the future. You know, there was that thought process with a lot of people that as soon as we got a Labour government in Westminster, then all would be well. To be fair, Labour in Westminster never actually promised that they would actually sort all our issues out. So I can't actually criticise them for that. You know, when I pointed out in Frosk that the changes in national insurance were actually costing us as a council 2.7 million, or to put it in context, that's 3.6% of the council tax increase is going straight to Westminster from the council, doesn't even touch the sides. What I'd hoped for would be the reaction that, yes, we, you know, members would do what you've been doing with the Welsh Assembly government, Charlie, and actually contacting and lobbying our MPs to actually do what the government said it would do and actually fully fund those national insurance changes, rather than passing the message that, well, we were worse under Liz Truss. You know, if that's the bar, it's a pretty low bar that we're aiming at, if I'm honest about it. You know, Amanda, I haven't actually asked you to play fantasy council tax and crunch me some numbers on if we lived in Denbighshire, what would the tax be? If we lived in Gwynedd, what would the tax be? If we had a Conservative government, what would the tax be? You know, what I've tried to do is have a look at and do my own figures of where I think we've actually been going wrong and why we're facing such a large council tax increase. If we tackled the school estates 3 years ago, when we first started seeing these issues, we've been well down the way to actually sorting those out. And I calculate that, you know, we're looking at about 2.1 million there. If we listen to our residents that we actually can't afford these white elephant active travel schemes, you know, we're spending 21 million on that bridge to nowhere down in Betws-y-Coed. We're spending the money on the walkways and cycleways from Junction to Glanconwy. I know a lot of that money is actually coming in grant money, but we're still having to borrow 2.1 million. And the finance cost of that, I calculate again, is around 160,000 a year. We've got the maintenance of those walkways and those bridges. Best practice in civil engineering is that you work out your maintenance cost, your whole life costs before you embark on a project. We don't seem to have done that in Conwy. These figures usually come out at between 2 and 4% of the capital costs. You know, if I'm being generous and say we've got maintenance costs of these projects of 1%, 210,000. Mochtra Shed is this long-running saw. Again, being generous, there's 300,000 going there a year. We're employing a new environmental health officer, because the law has changed in Wales that we have to review to 2 parlours and piercing parlours. We're going to employ a specialist solicitor to look at contracts and purchases. Why aren't we just sharing this expertise and using this expertise across the whole of North Wales? We've employed a diversity officer to actually produce more reports to go to Cardiff. Again, you know, we're pushing on 200,000 with all these things. We haven't got still haven't got a medium-term asset management plan. I know there's one on the way, but if we'd disposed of this office, Bodlondeb, a few years ago, we'd be saving what, 400,000 a year? You know, if we got, you know, I'd put down here roughly, if we got what we were owed from the health board, which was £500,000, Mike pointed out that it could be £1.9 million due from that. You know, we're not achieving the savings that we say we're going to achieve in our budgets in previous years. We're not actually collecting revenue from things like car parking that we said we were going to collect. Again, you know, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds here. So, you know, potentially those are just a few points that I've picked out that I've been banging on about for the last 3 years. You know, there's, you know, 4.5 million to £5 million worth of savings there, which probably equates to 5.5%, 6% on the council tax. So what have we got right in the budget? As we've pointed out, I think we've got education right. It came out as the most important thing as far as our residents were concerned. I know we were looking initially at a 5% cut in education, and we've done the right thing. We're actually maintaining that education budget, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for Education in calling and arranging that emergency schools budget meeting where we heard from our heads. And that's probably what actually convinced us that the right thing to do is actually fund education properly. I think that over the past 3 years, reserves should have been used to transform the service, to actually put the resources in, as you quite rightly pointed out, Trian. There's a huge amount of work and extra effort that goes into doing these things, and we need to move them at pace. And that is where we should have been using our reserves to deliver this structural change within the services. We need to adapt to those new ways of working. And that's what our residents were telling us. We need to implement AI. We should only be spending the money that we can afford to spend on carbon reduction and active travel. We need to anticipate what's happening rather than actually looking back all the time. We need to anticipate what's actually going to happen and do that horizon scanning. And you know, so on that theme again, be really interested to hear from the Cabinet Member for the Economy when Charlie pointed out that our share of take from business rates wasn't actually keeping pace with what we were receiving from the Welsh Government and what we were taking from our residents. What is this budget delivering on the business scenario for the businesses of Conwy? You know, what's happening as far as his employment is concerned when the national insurance comes in? Because if people aren't going to be taking on more workers, if they're going to be making people redundant and shedding workers, then that has an implication onto our homeless budget, onto our social services budget, as a huge, and also our tax collection budget.
Councillor Gareth, you've well over your 5 minutes.
Okay, shall I just finish off
Yes,
quickly?
please.
You know, to me, the definition of madness is to keep on doing the same thing and expect different results. I think we've been doing the same thing, and the results we're getting at nigh on 10% council tax increases. I think the residents deserve better, and our staff deserve better. We really need to move forward at pace and do a lot of the things that Preen was talking about. But we should have started them 3 years ago. Thank you.
Great deal, Councillor Gareth. I'm going to move on to Councillor Hannah now on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. So as an ex-teacher, I'm going to be focusing on the education, and thank you to Gareth for recognising so much of the good work that's been going on here, but it has been going on for some time. So over the last few years, we've managed to fund education at higher per pupil level than Denbighshire and Flintshire have. We also fund it at a higher level than most schools in England, in fact, the English average. The Welsh policies that we have here give EMA, so an education maintenance allowance that allows our sixth formers, our students from poor families to be able to stay in education. And we have a a level playing field for our children at primary school because they all get the same meals. We're putting in over 7.7 million in extra investment in our education, and that includes 5.9 million going direct to those schools. We're also including 700,000 for specialist ALM provision. The social care provision, a lot of that is for our children that we look after. And it's increasing the number of foster carers and building specialist provision. And that's going to help our children be cared for within this county. It's also in line with the Welsh Labour policy to stop children's care being a quick profit-making hedge fund-owned business. And it will lead to long-term savings for Conwy as well. Our schools have falling numbers, but a class of 25 still costs the same as a class of 30. So we are and have been tackling the change in these numbers and being proactive. We're benefiting learners by amalgamating schools to provide a seamless 3 to 11 learning environment for many of them. This is educationally more effective, is financially more efficient, and it's an ongoing process in Conwy. This budget allows us to support education. It's a #1 priority chosen by our residents. And also, just in answer to the active travel criticisms, I've spent some time in Europe recently. You wouldn't be amazed how many of the children in winter cycle to school because they have some completely safe way to get to school and back with their friends. And I think it's important when we talk about this active travel is it's actually about our communities being able to get about in a safer way. And actually their well-being and their health benefits from that are not to be overlooked. And these are about children. They're going to have to live in Conwy a lot longer than the rest of us that are sat here. And I think it's really important that we are focusing on carbon reduction and things like that, because there's the futures of those children that our own residents have said are the most important priority for them that will be affected. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. Okay, Councillor Tristan.
Diolch yn fawr iawn a diolch am y cyfle gael siarad. Dwi'n falch iawn o glywed am yr arian y 5 miliwn sydd ar ei ffordd. Dwi'n gwybod na benthygiad ydi o, achos mae'n destun pryder mawr i mi bod wasgfa sydd yn digwydd yn flynyddol ar gyllideb IRF. Dwi'n siŵr bod y cynghorydd Charlie wedi cael llond bol arna i yn Cwynoth o fod dro ar ôl tro bod cyflwr ffyrdd cefn gwlad yma yn enbyd, maen nhw fel gwylod gwely afon. Ac dyna pam fel dwi'n dweud, dwi'n gwybod na benthyciad ydi o, ond mae'n hen bryd i ni newid y fformula oherwydd, fel dwi'n dweud, beth sydd gennym ni yng nghefn gwlad, does gennym ni ddim nifer o wasanaethau sydd lawr ar y glannau, a mae'r ffyrdd yn allweddol i deithio, does e ddim trafnidiaeth cyhoeddus neu mae heini yn bryn odiaeth. A felly dwi'n cael galwad wythnosol erbyn hyn gen bobl sydd wedi cael car, wedi malirio yn spring neu'n deiar ag ati sydd wedi torri. A wedyn mae'n hen bryd i ni sylweddoli mae yng nghefn gwlad bod y ffyrdd ma'n weithiennau pwysig i deithio i'r gwaith ag ati. A felly dwi'n falch, fel dwi'n dweud, o'r benthyciad, ond jyst eisiau tynnu sylw y wasgfa sydd ar IRF a sydd yn effeithio cefn gwlad. A mi ddydau yn grafog hefyd mod i'n pryderu am safon y trwsio sydd ar y ffyrdd. Mae'r safon yn aml iawn yn dila. Ac yr sawl sydd ganddo glistiau glywed, dwi wedi deud sawl tro i Geraint Edwards mod i'n siomedig iawn yn safon y trwsio, y patio. Ond yn dod yn ôl at y gyllideb, pa ddewis arall gennym ni? Dach chi wedi clywed am y broses sydd wedi digwydd, a dwi ddim yn fwy mawr ar ffigurau. Mae'n iawn i'r toried yn dydi, sefyll yna a phregethu ar ddiwrnod fel heddiw, ond mae'r broses wedi digwydd ar hyd yr amser. Y gwir amdani ydy, yr unig ffordd, yr dull amgen sydd yna o'r gyllideb heddiw ydy comisiynwyr. A mae'r rhain chi'n cofio'r comisiynwyr ath i Fôn, a mi roedd yna un cyn gynghorydd oedd yn siambr yma. Cynghorydd Gareth Jones wedi bod yn gomisiynydd i Sir Fôn pan math y gyllideb yn fanna, mi godwyd y treth yn aruthrol. 'Sa neb eisiau gweld codi'r dreth, a mae o'n ddiwrnod du yn hanes y cyngor. Ond y gwir amdani di bod rhaid i ni dderbyn y gyllideb. Y gai ddiolch i'r swyddogion ac i Charlie. Pwy fas eisiau bod yn arweinydd yn gyda'r fath bwysau sydd arno fo. Felly gai ddiolch i'r swyddogion, a dwi'n meddwl bod o'n bwysig i ni gefnogi, does gennym ni ddim dewis arall ond cefnogi'r gyllideb. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Councillor Tristan. Moving on to Councillor Anne on Zoom.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll turn my video off just because of an imbalanced broadband. My comment and a question is I'm going to restrict it to schools, and that won't be a surprise to any of you. I did actually at the last meeting of FROSC attempt to propose that we have a second alternative proposal to consider here today, and that would be one that was more funding for schools. I mean, officers quite vigorously spoke against it, and in fact tried to, I think my understanding was, say that it was unconstitutional, but we resolved that and clearly it wasn't unconstitutional. However, the proposal didn't get support from any members and therefore it failed. In my view, this budget today, whilst lots of effort's gone into it, and I want to recognise that all the way around and appreciate it, but I actually think it's anti-schools and that it's anti-pupils, and on the back of that, anti-wellbeing of future generations, and therefore I can't support it. We're spending a lot of money, and all we are doing for schools is actually giving them a standstill budget and then giving them 21% of the available new monies, while 51% of the available new monies goes to social care. And obviously those figures are notwithstanding the fact that additional monies has come in the last few days. I think Charlie's slides, for me, particularly if we could have looked them in more focus and detail, actually evidence the erosion of our school funding. This year, our school funding has gone down to 28% of our council pie. I would expect this budget will take that down by a couple of percent. I have asked a number of times for that to be quantified, but I haven't sort of had any response to it to date. So if we're at 28%, what's Denbighshire at? Well, they're at 32%. That's the decision that their local members have made about what is the priority of schools in Denbighshire. And I actually think that's probably more appropriate. Wrexham takes the same view because currently their proportion of the council pie they spend on schools, and I'm talking about schools only, is 33%. I think at the budget working group that Councillor Mike made reference to, we actually could see and feel and hear the sort of pressure that schools are under. So to say that a standstill budget is protecting schools, I can't support that. And also, more important than that, I think we're treating them really differently to the rest of services. There's no business cases for schools. There might well be some on social care and central education, but there's no actual business case for schools. And this year we're going to be reducing the school improvement service by, I think it's 58 grand, and then thereafter by 100 grand year on year. I mean, it just really is not good enough. And Welsh government in the last couple of weeks, they've reduced schools' budget grants funding for school standards, would you believe, by something like 20%, I believe. And although there's an ALN business case today for 700 grand, that hasn't changed from my memory in the last 3 years, but the actual demand in schools for ALN and social inclusion support is just going through the roof and causing considerable stress and strain at school level. I mean, Reen has gone through very eloquently what he's done with SIPFA. Schools were absolutely missing in that analysis and support for the last 14 months. And yet within our financial data, we compare schools and we include reserves against their budgets when we don't do that for the rest of services. So I do welcome the fact that there is now, and actually I made a proposal to that, or a suggestion to that we're going to be having some professional external input and evaluation of what our schools funding is, because I actually don't think it's fair. And, councils are all in the same boat, but they're not all treating schools the way that we are, and that's our choice, and I think it's the wrong choice. But my question is, what is the percentage that's of the council pie that this proposed budget is going to reduce our schools funding to? If anybody could answer that question, I'd be appreciated of it.
Thank you, Councillor Aaron. I'm just going to bring in Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on a quick point about reference to officers giving advice in finance, resource and overview and scrutiny committee meeting about the proposal being unconstitutional. The advice there was on a proposal for Cabinet to essentially put forward options to Council. And the advice given was that it's Cabinet's responsibility under the budget policy framework, which does form part of our constitution, to draw up firm proposals to put forward to Council and submit those to Council. So that's what that advice was saying, that advice is correct.
Thank you, Matt. I'm just going to call in Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, I'll respond to Anne first and then Gareth. Clearly, if you want to put more money into schools, then you have to identify where that money is coming from. So you have to identify where you want to cut, or you've got to add extra money to council tax. I mean, that is completely the options there. So it's not a balanced budget just to suggest I want to put more in there. And I said this in my address, I just think we're our own worst enemies. Everybody, and you were a member of a cabinet that supported the highest council tax rise for this council in 1920 at a 4% cut to schools and £1 million reserves. So I do struggle a bit in terms of what we're putting into schools. We know our figures, given the relative funding we get, given the relative population, that we support schools really well. And we've done that every year. Now, the numbers are clear there. Whether it's enough is a different point. But I think we compare really, really well to other authorities. Flintshire yesterday in a position where they've had to raise council tax by 9.5%. The £2.7 million cut to schools. Wrexham last year physically took £4 million out. So it's clear that everyone is struggling, but I absolutely don't accept that we haven't done our best to support schools. I absolutely do not accept that. Are they in a good place? No. And then I'll move on to Gareth's points. There were many, I guess, but I think the main one is I have had 5 children, each one more beautiful than the other. So there was no one ugly in my pram, but it is absolutely clear. Yeah, there have been ugly budgets, and that's been really clear. Now, I don't know where you find the inspiration, Gareth, but you seem to have all your best ideas at the full council budget setting meeting. You literally had a list there as long as your arm. No, I'm sorry. You can.
Members, can I just interrupt for 1 minute? Members, I expect this chamber to be a safe place where I don't want to hear anybody oohing and ahhing. I want somebody to have the opportunity to have this say, as I am going to allow everybody else. So I would really appreciate a bit of respect.
And I accept there's always things you could do better. But if you look at the services this council delivers on its combined budget compared to our neighbours, I think we perform really, really well. I know the council is really well respected at a national level. We are audited by many, many external bodies, and they are broadly really, really positive. So I will work with anybody. I will work with anybody to bring ideas forward. My door's always open. If someone's got a suggestion, then we'll do it. But I don't accept that we're a badly performing authority. I just don't accept that at all. I think it's been really, really difficult over the last number of years. But as I showed, austerity has ripped the heart out of local government. We've seen that. There's not been the money to spend on what people want. I'm an independent. I'm not going to political beef here, but it failed miserably from a financial point of view. It didn't reduce debt. It's caused long-lasting damage to our society, in my opinion. And I think that's really clear. And you see the rise in the need in our education, the rise in the need of our social care. So we are where we are. As I say, though, I know we all want the best for our residents, and I'm not immune to criticism because nobody gets everything right. But I just think we should be looking to work together and to find solutions rather than just picking petty points each other. And I would be interested in a quiet moment to have your analysis of the budget that your party put forward in 2019-20, whether you thought that was a sensible approach, Gareth, because it's easy to criticise. It's much harder to actually deliver those proposals and those budgets.
Diolch, councillor Charlie. I'm going to call in. Councillor Paul.
Chair, I haven't had an answer to my question yet.
I don't have that level of detail. I'm sure Amanda would be able to work it out for you. Sorry.
I'm sure we can come back on that, councillor Ann.
I've asked that question 3 times already at Frosk, Chair, so I'm really disappointed that I can't get an answer to it. But if I can't, I can't. Thanks.
I'm calling in councillor Paul.
Thank you, Chair. A resident tackled me in the street the other day and he said, he's a local resident, and he said, "Why do you give cover to Charlie McCubry?" And I say, "Cover? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I'm going to give you more grief than I give Charlie McCubry because you're worse than Charlie McCubry in what you suggest." So in speaking today, as everybody knows, and I refer to 6.29 in the report, where it says it is important that members are aware that Welsh Government have modelled an increase of 10.26 in council tax within the settlement. Now, I think we should have started with that figure because, as everybody's shared and we all know, there are lots of people suffering at the moment, and they're suffering because though we try and provide the best possible services, we struggle to do that. Not that there isn't good work going on every day, all day, and all of us see it and know it. But we are in the position we are because of austerity. Because of austerity, the 14 years that we've had, and now we're in this desperate situation where, well, I think worse than austerity, we've now got the rise of the Reform Party and their arguments. Now, I'm one of those people that come from a tradition where the people that challenge me on the street, I will argue the toss with them. And if we think going down a route where we in any way compromise on the assertions from that area, we are lost. We are truly lost as a community. We have to take action to support our community and our vulnerable people. And part of that is to pay higher tax, whether it's council tax or other tax, because I want to see improved public services. I want to see money in our schools. Some classes next year will be as high as 35, even 37 children in some classes in this authority. That's reality in primary schools. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see teachers made redundant. I don't want to see teachers' assistants made redundant. And I think I'm not going to be able to propose a budget, and Charlie knows I'll vote for this budget because there's no option but to vote for this budget. But I'm not happy because I don't think we are being bold enough to say we need to pay more money to sustain public services. And most importantly, we need to take on, and we do need to take on publicly in the arguments about going down a different route, because it's a very dangerous route that we go down if we do not publicly advance public services. And the way you advance public services is you pay tax to provide those public services. Yes, it's very tough because of the regressive nature of council tax. I would prefer to see an increase on income tax rather than council tax. But as SIP's told us, the only powers that we have are to make cuts or to increase council tax. And my preference would be to raise council tax and challenge those who say to us for many very distressing reasons why we shouldn't do that. And I'm not going to go into all of that today, but I'm glad in Conway that we support the diversity of our community and our most vulnerable people. And I'm proud that we do that.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. I'm going to call in Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Your approach to this has been very clear, and I respect your honesty in that you recognise if we want to spend more money, then someone's got to pay for it. Where I struggle, as you say, is that it's a really disproportionate burden on the poorest council tax, and we know that. We have a situation where people want Scandinavian levels of service, but we don't pay anything like the rates of tax they pay in those countries. We have a kind of somewhere in between the US system, which is low tax, no services, Scandinavian, which is high tax, lots of services. We're in a really awkward place in the middle where we're paying a lot of tax, but the services aren't what they should be. And I think it's very clear in the way we've been funded over the years that that's where that balance lies. But it is a balance, isn't it? It's a balance between taking money out of people's pockets. It's about balance, about trying to drive our services as best we can. I think with an ugly budget, as Gareth called it, which I agree it is, you're probably in a position where you've annoyed everybody a bit. It's probably about right at the end of the day, because there's no perfect balance to this whatsoever. But I am acutely aware of people struggling. And I think you've got to have a real 100% justification to put your hand in that pocket and take further money out. So, I understand where you're coming, and I do appreciate your honesty and your courage essentially to stand up for that. And if you're protecting me, that's even better. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Just to let you know, members, we've got 7 speakers left. It's Councillor Harry, Councillor Simon, Councillor Louise, Councillor John, Councillor Julie, Councillor Nigel and Councillor Kate. So I'll bring in Councillor Harry.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to touch on the funding formula, which I think has been referenced already in this meeting. But first of all, I do just want to pick up a point around some of the comments that have been made about previous council tax increases and a council tax increase in 2019-20 being, sorry, 2018-19 being the highest. I want to be really clear, that council tax increase in pounds and pence, which is what people pay, was £112.16. What we are looking at today is £155.14. It is nothing short but misleading to claim that this council tax increase is not the highest. Just turning to the funding formula, I think the leader did make a number of points about how he feels it's unfair. I think a lot of members here will probably be on the same wavelength, and I don't want to rehearse those now as we're familiar with them. But he did touch on the point around the role for WLGA and how trying to work for WLGA to get them to call for an independent review of the local government funding formula is quite like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. Now, the leader and some members here will recall when we had this meeting back in 2020, there was a proposal put forward that we give notice that we would leave the WLGA. And at the time, the suggestion was that would realise a saving of £80,000, significantly larger than the majority of the budget reductions we are looking at this year. That proposal was withdrawn because there was a commitment given to members that a report would come forward outlining the implications of leaving the WLGA. Now, it's something I've raised since. It's been poo-pooed. But as the leader, I think, has mentioned that working with the WLGA to bring about this independent review of the Welsh Government funding formula is proving challenging, does he think that now might be the time for us to look at giving our 12-month notice to the WLGA to make it clear to them that we're serious? They need to start fighting our corner in Cardiff.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. I'll just bring in Councillor Charlie.
Just to address your first point, Harry, I was working off the graph. People do talk about council tax and percentages, but you're absolutely right. The compound of 3 big rises in 3 years is a bigger amount, so I accept that. But obviously, earnings have gone up, etc., etc. But there was no intention to mislead there, because, and I did refer to in 2014 about what council what that would raise. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, there's frustration about the formula. But the WHA provides an awful lot of other benefits. As spokesperson for health and social care, there's a report came to me yesterday about the impact in councils about funding extra care, about taking people out of hospital. So there's more to it than just the funding formula. Now, I know the WLJ are scheduled to come to Dressfield Council at some stage fairly soon. We couldn't fit it in before this meeting. So I think that'd be a good time there to ask those questions about the value, but there's more to it than just the formula. You know, it's a political organisation at the end of the day. I think the officers are really good, but it's about that political support for things to move forward. But yeah, you know, I take your point, but there's more to it than just the formula, although it does frustrate me.
Diolch, Councillor Charlie. I'm going to call in Councillor Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to say I'm glad this budget actually does preserve the budgets for schools. I know, and I do sympathise with Anne's point that it would be a good thing to be increasing budgets for schools again, because we have cut them to the bone, and the 1% cut that was proposed previously would have resulted in making teachers compulsory redundant. I really do not want to see that in any of the schools that I'm a governor for, and I would not want to show my face to the parents if we had to do that. Thank you very much.
Diolch, Councillor Simon. I'm going to call in Councillor Louise.
Diolch, Chair. And it's been really interesting looking at the history of council tax rises and council tax levels. I enjoyed that graph. And obviously much has been said of the budget of 2019, which I remember well, when we were with our independent colleagues in a coalition. And I remember that being incredibly tight on that day. I think there was 1 or 2 votes in it, which means that 26 or 27 you who are in this room probably voted against that budget on that day. So to turn around and say today that you have no choice but to vote against the budget, or indeed in cabinet when it was talked about councillors that didn't vote against the budget were not willing to support vulnerable residents, is unfair and disingenuous. This is the world of politics. And I have been on the opposite side of this, and I have seen a lot of people who sit in this room vote against budgets when they had no viable alternative. So please, let's not go down that route of shaming the people that perhaps don't accept this budget, won't want to do this budget, won't want to vote for this budget. Let's just kill that right now. And the reason why I'm not going to vote for this budget is that it is very unfair to have this one day in the year when we're all supposed to sort of come together. It is a cabinet structure here at Conway. It is an executive. The executive have the power. That's how it works. And we are being led with the report here today because of the decisions that cabinet make over the last 12 months. So to ask us all just to come on board and there's no alternative and there's no choice just isn't fair. And I have to just make the point, obviously we're all in coalition in Conway. It's coalition politics, always will be. And at the moment, the independents are in coalition with Labour and Plaid. And I am just stunned, and maybe there has been conversations in back rooms about the implications of the NI. 3.6% of the council tax is roughly earmarked, give or take, towards the NI payments that we are not going to get back from UK government. 3.6%. Mike in the corner talked about a reasonable tax, council tax around 6%. Well, without those increases, it would be 5.3 for the whole 5%. And I am just staggered that the independents are still in coalition with Labour because of it, and the impact that this will have on the hospitality trade, which is the main economy of our county. The budget is not going to be realised this time next year. We are going to overspend. It overspent in year 1 of the new administration, it overspent in year 2, and this will fall on reserves. There are ideas that Gareth particularly has put forward, but this is politics. You're not going to listen to our ideas. You're not going to bring him into the inner fold. This is an executive structure, and that's how politics works. And I just want to remind everybody of that before we get a bit of name calling before we vote for this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Louise. I'm going to call in Councillor John Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. A diolch I chitha hefyd yr arweinydd am cyflwyniad. Now, you don't have to put them on now. I'll go to English now. I can speak 2 spokes, as Austin once said. Thank you, Charlie, for your presentation. and all the staff that have worked behind that presentation. I think it's important to thank them as well. I feel that I have to support this budget, this council tax proposal, as it is the lowest possible that we can get set to protect our schools. I think we should also point out that 0.68, I think, % of it goes to the police and the fire service. So it's something that we need to take into consideration, and the public should know that. I think it protects our schools, even though it's a nil budget. It's a standstill budget, as they say. But I'm confident that the schools can absorb this, because after all, 82% or more of that is pure pay. And that's another matter that's been dealt with elsewhere. I also appreciate that the extra money received from Welsh Government was due to our own Jane Dodd's deal to pass the WG budget. And I'm glad that it has been used to reduce the council tax from the original proposed figure as set out by the Cabinet. It shows that in a democracy, one vote is very powerful. Now, I don't know anything about horizon scanning, as Gareth said. I've done a lot of navel gazing myself, but we can't have everything. I don't think so anyway. But who knows what next year's budget will bring? The settlement, as it'll be in an election year, and maybe we'll get some more money, and then we can look at putting some money aside to our reserves. But I do support this council tax proposal, and thanks everybody who's put the proposal together. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Councillor John. I'm going to call in Councillor Julie.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair. Gosh, yeah, every year we end up in the same situation, don't we, where people come forward with views and opinions. I have to call Anne out on saying that we're anti-schools, anti-pupils and anti-future generational. It's just incredibly unfair. We have worked very, very hard, as John has just said there, to reduce the impact that the ongoing budget pressures have on schools, and to bring that down to 0% was not expected by schools. That's something we've pushed for and pushed for. We've listened to them. As Mike said before, it was very emotive when some of the head teachers came along to represent in the budget working group on schools. I have visited with the leader, as we've done each year. We've gone out to visit schools. Again, we visited the majority of secondary schools, and now we're working our way through primary schools to sit down with head teachers and understand what it looks like in schools currently. What can we do to address things? And, you know, in an ideal world, I've said it before, there would be additional money from whichever government's in. Obviously, I'm independent. I don't really care about party politics. I care about making sure that we can do the best that we can do with what we have. And I think that's what we have before us today. But ideally, yes, there should be more money. There should be additional funding. You know, our schools are in a position where, and we've spoken about it for many years, we've got the new curriculum, which I was so excited for. And unfortunately, rarely do I ever discuss that with schools currently, because it's all about budgets, budgets, budgets. And that's not right. And hopefully in time, something will change with that. I've been visiting schools over the last few weeks to talk to head teachers to see, is there anything we can do as education services, as members, as a council as a whole, in different departments? Are there other opportunities in terms of grant funding, sharing that best practice that's happening? And I know Lodi and the team work really well with schools to do that, as does David Jones in terms of the financial perspective, to work with schools to see what can we do to support them and help them. And I would also say, you know, schools get it. They get that they're part of a bigger picture, that they're not over there in isolation. They are part of the local authority, and they themselves would understand that, you know, a large input of funding to them by taking that from another department is likely to have an impact on them. They get that because they appreciate the support, obviously, of the education services, but we've also got social services. We have the housing team who support some of our families to live obviously in better accommodation or to prevent homelessness. We have our youth services who work fantastically well with our young people, and they also go into schools as well as what they do outside of schools. So, we are doing everything we can. And yes, in an ideal world, like I said, there would be additional funding, but we will continue to push that. I know I push it certainly when I meet with the minister, when I meet with the WLGA, other cabinet members for education across Wales. For the last few years, I did chair the GWER joint committee, and moving forward, my hope is we continue to have that dialogue with the other cabinet members for education across North Wales, and the education service work incredibly well to support schools, and will continue to do that moving forward. It was touched on around ALN. We will continue to look at opportunities to improve provision of ALN. Obviously, frustratingly, we've had changes that haven't come with funding, as we hear repeatedly with different changes of policy that come through. But I know that Amanda's looking at grant funding that can help to support some of those changes in ALN, and we education services are looking at opportunities to do things differently, and they're working very closely with schools. It is, I think, the majority of members here, probably one of our number one priorities is the approach that we take to schools, the support that we offer. Some of us do that as governors, some of us do that by attending scrutiny and really looking at what's happening in education and what's happening in our schools. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank members for supporting this, to work with us to get this down to 0%. And if it goes through today, I'm sure schools will, like I said, really appreciate that. And to thank schools, as Mike said, and I think the leader touched on it, it was incredibly emotional when head teachers came along and explained to us what it looks like in schools, the landscape for them day to day, whether that's as a head teacher, whether it's their teaching staff, their TAs in schools. Things have shifted and changed. Schools are not what they were 100 years ago or so many years ago when I was at school. It's changed. They're social services. They're the sort of front door to our vulnerable families, and we need to continue to support them. And I certainly, as long as I hold this portfolio, will do everything I can to do that. I know Charlie will as leader, and I expect all of us as members will continue to do that, as was said in the consultation that we had with the people of Conway and the county of Conway, and they put education at the very top of their priority list. So we'll continue to do that. We are absolutely not anti-school or anti-pupils. We are the complete opposite of that. And I'm proud of what we've done and what will hopefully be put through today, which is supporting our schools to cash flat and supporting them to continue to work towards some of those changes that are happening in terms of their demographic. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Julie. I'm going to
Chair, can I just come in on one other point? Anne mentioned the percentage. So if you go to page 202, and Amanda might tell me off this, but I've just kind of done a bit of a calculation in terms of, back of a fag packet, and I'm not particularly gifted, I suppose, when it comes to mathematics. A little bit in my head, but so overall there, and I appreciate this is the estimate summary, we're looking at 104.698 million for the education services, and that's from a budget of 319 million. So I work that out as a percentage of 32.72% for education. So that would then put us certainly not at the 28, but closer to 33%. So
thank you very much for that, Julie.
Point of clarity, just Chair, is my question was about percentage for schools, which is 28 at the minute, and what would this new budget reduce the 28 to? So just to be clear, that was my question.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. I'm going to call in Councillor Nigel.
Diolch, Chair, and first of all, I want to thank the leader, Charlie, for his presentation. I think it made it very clear on the pressures that we face and where we're prioritising our limited funds. I also want to thank Amanda and the team of officers who have worked extensively over the year to bring us to the position we are today. Also, the elected members here in the chamber that availed themselves and took part in the budget setting meetings, very, very important meetings to bring forward our focuses and our priorities. I also want to thank Councillor Louise for bringing national politics into this meeting, although I would have kept it out personally. But while we're in there, I want to thank Emily, our deputy leader, for having the ear of ministers down in Cardiff Bay, which has no doubt paid dividends, because I think this week we've seen that we're having, well, I hope so, £10 million towards Venue Cymru revamp, which we most welcome. And I want to thank Emily for that. Gareth says, what do we do for business? Well, we had £20 million of shared prosperity, Charlie and myself and other colleagues were sat on the panel distributing that money to local groups, charities, businesses and so on. So the businesses have throughout the county have benefited from that. Small businesses, large businesses. Charlie mentioned about business rates haven't risen. Welsh Government don't charge business rates to small businesses. My family business in Denbighshire, we don't pay business rates. And I'm really pleased about that. It's sustained the business, created or kept the employment. And, you know, small businesses in Wales, mighty oaks come from small seeds. And that support that those small businesses get, they grow, create employment. And that's the nature of our national economy. Gareth talks about, you know, when he talked about what have we done to support businesses. Last week, I visited a business in Kimmel Bay who were fortunate enough to have £100,000 worth of grant money towards some new equipment. That has brought in £4 million worth of investment. They're tripling the size of the factory. They're moving to a new unit in Kimmel Bay. They're hoping to create an additional 40 jobs. They're selling products throughout the world to blue chip companies, including Rolls-Royce Aerospace. I went to see Llandudno Bay Hotel, another business, a tourism business that was supported with a grant. They've reduced their energy costs down from over £300,000 a year, and they tell me it's going to be sub £100,000 a year. That will help sustain that business, sustain employment, improve that business. This year, I think we've given over £1 million to Mossin Estates for the M&S building in Llandudno. All these things are all bolstering our economy, creating employment, and that's what Conway County Borough Council are doing for business. Thank you.
Diolch, Councillor Nigel. Okay, just to let you know, members, we've still got Councillor Kay, Councillor Abdul, and my final speaker will be Councillor Cathy. Councillor Kay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really between a rock and a hard place with this budget. I fully understand why we've got to where we are today, and to me the funding just needs to be so much better from Welsh and central government, because the pressures we're putting on our residents to pay are what we legally have to provide: education, social care, all of these things. You know, it's not fair. These year-on-year raises are just not fair on our residents. I live in an area that's really deprived. I live in a council estate. My residents are many low-income working class families that really are on the breadline, and I am doing food bank referrals daily for these people, and I'm struggling today. I know we've got to set a balanced budget. I know we have, and what I don't want to do is send us into a section 114, because that's not what anyone wants. But I also can't go back to my community after voting for another significant rise and then send somebody else to the food bank. You know, I've got mums in tears to me on the school run and things like that. And, you know, our residents are really struggling. So something has got to change, and it's got to change from the top. And I am struggling with this decision today. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. I'm going to call in Councillor Abdul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Just to make myself clear, I am not anti-school either, anti-education, because I do know education is the backbone of any nations. I have made a comment on Frost to say, why haven't we got the backbone? Why have we let one group of people coming in with their passion play and not others? Because every service is important to every department, and that doesn't make me anti-education. I've been a governor for last over 21 years, so I do know a bit about running a school. As a governor, that's what you do. I've been governor when we had limitless budget to 5% cut to now 0. But that's why I said 1% wouldn't make much difference. But I made clear to my group leader that I will not support any budget over the 9%. But council leader and the Amanda and everyone else worked very hard, and thank you to Welsh Government for giving us last minute extra funding, which made it down to 9%. And I will be supporting this. Politics aside, it's okay. Talk is cheap, but we're not going to put hand in our pocket to say, here, we've got some, we'll save this. We all doing our best. And I think Charlie and Chief Executive and Amanda, everyone needs our appreciation really at a time like this. Yes, we all doing our best. It's not the best result, but we have to accept it. And I, for one, will be supporting this budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Abdul. I'm going to call in Councillor Cathy, but I have 2 speakers after that, which is Councillor Cheryl, and the final speaker will be Councillor Emily. So, Councillor Cathy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone for this detailed report. This is my first time going through the budget process as a cabinet member for children, families and safeguarding. As such, I found the work thorough, transparent, despite the changing landscape we were navigating constantly. As has been mentioned, there's been a robust democratic trail with opportunities for people to challenge and shape what we are looking at today. So I'll just leave that there. We've had external consultation. We're investing in the priorities that both members and residents have identified, so I am content with that. We've also heard in detail from the leader about the tensions between the NHS and our social care provision. We need much greater collaboration, I believe. I would point out to people who think we are not trying to get the money back from the NHS that we are owed, that is absolutely not the case. I myself am involved with that, together with Amanda, Trine and Charlie. We're taking that very seriously. Those of you who attended the recent Social Care Scrutiny Committee will be aware of the robust and detailed transformation work that's been going on for a number of years in social care and education. This is designed for us to take control, rebalance the market, look at provision, and therefore mitigate the escalating costs from external suppliers by controlling that more and providing internally. Many exciting projects were detailed in that meeting. Those of you who haven't had a chance to, didn't have a chance to attend, I really would recommend that you look at the recording with the presentation from Tim Pritchard. So this is supported by our clear focus on early intervention and prevention in order not only to look at our costs, but to look at the quality of life for our most vulnerable people. Across Wales, there's 256 million of pressures in social care. So all councils, all 22, remain deeply concerned about these ongoing pressures, not just us, highlighting the continued impact of growing demographic challenges, rising cost of living, workforce shortages, and inflation across the entire social care system. Additionally, new responsibilities and legislation are being introduced without the appropriate levels of funding attached, which is extremely frustrating, but we have to deliver under those circumstances. So we talk about controlling spend, but not figures, not numbers. That is the increasing demand for our services with the fluctuations that we have to navigate, combined with greater complexity of care and support needs. As a result, budgets are being stretched everywhere. Recruitment and retention of staff remain significant challenges, although I was privileged to attend a meeting of our social care students in Coedpechler last Friday. We are growing our own. We are developing the social workers of the future. The motivation in that room was just awe-inspiring, and they are delighted with the support that Conwy is giving them and are very likely to remain with us, which is fantastic. There are increasing concerns about Council's ability to meet all care and support needs, but nevertheless, we do it. I am so proud to be working with Jenny, Kat, and Steph on these important areas of work. I also think it's more than unhelpful to pit education against social care. These services are all part of the same jigsaw that brings together our provision to support and protect our children. So the argument that this budget is anti-schools and anti-future generations is, in my opinion, both disingenuous and dangerous, especially in the wider financial landscape where we absolutely have to address to create a balanced budget. And finally, as Councillor Sam said in the opening prayer, let us strive to serve our residents, especially the most vulnerable in our communities. And I am clear that this budget recommendation does just that. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Councillor Cathy. I'm going to call in Councillor Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to propose that we have a recorded vote on this budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cheryl. My final speaker is Councillor Emily.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to second Cheryl's proposal for that. That's no problem at all. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that have been said. I was kind of hoping for a less of a political ride on this, but never the case in a budget, is it? So I'll just start off by addressing some of the comments from the other side of the room. I'll start off with one about it being everything being a cabinet decision and people not feeling that they've had input, because I struggle with that one, I must say, from a general point of view of how the council operates, because we have lots of boards and lots of other mechanisms other than cabinet which make decisions and do things. And I actually think we work quite well cross-party. You know, Councillor Gareth and Councillor Paul are on a housing board that I'm really heavily involved in, and everything that they say is taken seriously, and we do work together. And that came up through last night in the report that came through scrutiny. So to hear that people don't feel like they're able to have an input into it is really quite worrying. From our service, the proposals that have come forward for savings have come from our frontline staff. It's incredibly important that everyone has a say and that everyone is able to come forward with these things. This is certainly not a case where we're in cabinet, we know best, and this is what's happening. If anyone in here has an alternative budget, that they have different proposals, then that is well within the constitutional right for you to put that forward. I have not heard that. I'm also just gonna jump on the national insurance stuff, seeing as Councillor Louise is asking for the independents to pull out a coalition with Labour on that one. Better tackle that. Yes, absolutely. There are conversations going on behind the scenes and in public, because I think I've shown during my period of time at this council that I'm not afraid to tackle what's going on in party politics. If I don't agree with it, regardless of which party it's come from and my own, I will say I've been a very loud public advocate that I don't think the funding formula is right, and that it should be an independent review going on with that and not decided on the WRJ. Again, I'm yet to see the opposition take such a stance against their own party. But on the national insurance directly,
we were expecting a flat standstill budget during the last party in Westminster. So if we had a flat standstill budget, we would have had to have an over 20% council tax rise in order to balance the budget. So yes, having national insurance contributions that we are having to pay isn't ideal. Yes, there is lots of work going on behind the scenes. There's lots of work going on in public about trying to claim that back. But they're giving us an extra £15 million. You know, we've had the largest amount of spend since devolution began being transferred to Wales. So I think, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if we're being given 15 million and they're taking 2.5 million, to me, that's still better than a standstill budget, which would have made us have to consider an over 20% council tax rise for our residents. In regards to the WLGA, it is difficult, you know, it is really hard. It would be disingenuous for us all to sit here to say if things were different, then, you know, we would be voting in order for money to come away from our council. It is really hard. I don't think that that is the right mechanism in order to change the funding formula. I've been quite clear and open with that. I think it should be an independent review to check the lines and the formula. I'm sure it was appropriate at the time that it was written. Times have moved on, things have changed, and I think that it should reflect that. But the WLGA, as the leader has pointed out, it's far more than just the funding formula, and on a personal level, I think we're much better in it to be able to influence. And on that influencing side, we've done a lot this year. We've worked really hard on trying to make sure that Welsh Government are really aware of our priorities in Conway and what we need in order to protect our residents. So I'm just going to go through some of the wins that we've had this year from the extensive lobbying that we in Conway have done on this. So we've already mentioned the £10 million for Venue Cymru. There's also £500,000 that Welsh Government have put up for that as well. We've had changes on the data with the funding formula, and that will still be continuing to be pushed. We've had uplifts in social housing grant, which is for our RSLs, our social landlords, to build the houses, and additional uplifts in TACP, which is the grant for being able to buy properties back. We've also had additional money through prevention with housing support grant and children and communities grant. We've had more funding with mental health. We've had additional funding for ALN. We've had a new focus on transport with a £1 bus pass for children that's been announced. We've had additional funding for roads. That's all stuff that we in this council have lobbied Welsh Government on and won and succeeded and got that and secured that funding. So there's a lot of work that has been going on. There's a lot of work that has been going on with all governments to try and from all political parties to try and make that happen. And Councillor John is absolutely right to credit his party for the additional funding that arrived last week. We were really pleased to see that, and it was really good to be able to work cross-party in order to ensure that money went. And I know that that social care was really important in order to get that vote secured. So he's absolutely right in saying that every vote counts in democracy. I find the criticism on the Bridge to Nowhere a little bit weird, because that was actually written by you. So I find it slightly weird that we're now going down the line that we don't like it, but you know, everyone can change their mind, I suppose. I actually, you know, support the active travel routes, but there we are. But I just I want to say that I really want to thank our staff and our officers and the officers that don't come into chamber and that we don't see every day, and our frontline staff that are out there supporting our residents day in, day out, because they are the biggest assets to this council, and they look after and support our most vulnerable people. And they do an absolutely fantastic job. And they are also coming to the table with ways that this council can better support residents. I'm really proud that we offer over 670 care home packages, over 11,500 hours of care per week, and education for over 13,500 school children. So it's not great. We're not in a position where we wanted to be. We did want council tax to be lower, but I will always vote to protect our most vulnerable residents and do the right thing over what's easy, because no one else has managed to come up with an alternative, because otherwise there'd be an alternative budget proposed. So with that, I'm very happy to support the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Emily. Okay, Councillor Charlie, you do have a right to reply if you'd like to come in.
I think I've said enough, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, we have had a request for a recorded vote, so that will be done by a show of hands. So this vote is for a recorded vote by show of hands in the chamber and on Zoom, please. Okay, members, that has been requested and passed. So I think Sally is going to come along and she will ask you individually what your view is. Diolch, Sally.
Okay, so if I'll read out your names, so if you can just respond with for, against or abstain. Councillor Penny Andow.
For.
Councillor Cathy Augustine. For. Councillor Carol Beard.
For.
Councillor Anthony Batola.
Against.
Councillor Frank Bradfield.
For.
Councillor Chris Brockley.
For.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle.
Against.
Councillor David Carr.
Against.
Councillor Chris Cater.
For.
Councillor Sam Cotton.
Against.
Councillor Neil Coverley.
Against.
Councillor Simon Croft. Councillor
Simon, can you use your mic, please?
For. That was.
Councillor Sharon Dolman.
For.
Councillor Goromwy Edwards.
Applied.
Councillor Keith Eales.
For.
Councillor Gwenol Ellis.
Obliged.
Councillor Louise Emery.
An Eben.
Councillor Julie Fallon.
For.
Councillor Hannah Fleet.
For.
Okay. Councillor Sean Grady.
For.
Councillor Ros Griffiths Williams. For. Councillor Mandy Hawkins.
Abstain.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Applied.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor Dave Jones.
For.
Councillor Gail Jones.
For.
Councillor Gareth Jones.
Another.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
Blight.
Councillor Tristan Lewis.
O blaid.
Councillor Yvonne Lloyd.
O blaid.
Councillor Paul Lucock.
For.
Councillor Anne McCaffrey.
Against.
Councillor Charlie McCoubry.
Applied.
Councillor Bernice McLaughlin.
Abstain, sorry.
Councillor Thomas Montgomery.
Against.
Councillor Joe Nuttall.
Against.
Councillor Emily Owen.
For.
Councillor Nia Owen.
Obliged.
Councillor Angie O'Grady.
Abstain.
Councillor Stephen Price.
For.
Councillor Mike Priestley.
Applied.
Councillor Kay Redhead.
Abstain.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Obliged.
Councillor Dilwyn Roberts.
Applied.
Councillor John Roberts.
Obliged.
Councillor Harry Saville.
Against.
Councillor Susan Shotter.
Obliged.
Councillor Michael Smith.
For.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
For.
Councillor Jacob Williams,
Arnebyn.
and Councillor Aaron Wynne.
O blaid.
Okay, members, that's been passed. Okay, would you like me to just give the figures, which is 36 for, 12 against and 4 abstentions? Moving on to agenda item 10, corporate plan 2025 to 2027, pages 427, 457. Recommendations can be found on page 427. Councillor Charlie McCoubry will present this item.
Thank you, Chair.
John.
I did say I've been talking a bit much today, but hey, so yes, members, this report has done the rounds a little bit. It's been through scrutiny, been through cabinet, it's coming here for full approval. So the corporate plan is reviewed every year. The original iteration, this was written for 22 to 27, and as we've discussed at length today, we live in a very different world from a financial perspective than we predicted in 22. We were the first council in Wales to invite the WLGA in as a peer review. As part of that, in 23, they felt we should look to rationalise the corporate plan with closer alignment to our long-term financial planning. So the revised plan essentially puts financial resilience front and centre. We know that we can only deliver services to our residents if we are financially resilient, but I think it's also really important to reflect that 70% of our funding does come from external sources. So all the conversations we've been having today about lobbying for more money, we actually only have control of a relatively small bit. So it's a slimmed down version. I don't think it lacks ambition, but I may be many things, but I think a pragmatist is something that I think is really, really important in the circumstances that we're in. So the report's there for members to observe. Chair, I'm quite happy to move the recommendation. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Charlie, I've got proposer, Councillor Charlie. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Chris Cater. Okay, members, are there any questions?
Can I just make a couple of comments,
Of
Chair?
course you can, Councillor Chris.
Seconding the proposal, yeah. You know, we've rationalised the goals down from 9 to more focused 5, and I really support that. And also we've retained our long-term outcomes around the environment and housing, but also kept our focus on economic prosperity and education and health. So I really do support this, and I thank members because this has been to scrutiny, this has been to governance and audit, this has been to workshops. I thank members for all their input into this. It's been a combined effort.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. Any other questions? Okay, we've got a proposer and seconder. We can now go to the vote by show of hands in the chamber and on Zoom. Any against? Any abstentions? Councillor David, thank you. That's been carried, members. Okay, I'm moving on to agenda 11, pay accountability in local government, pay policy 2025 to 2026, including local government pension schemes, discretionary pension statement pages 458 to 499. Recommendations can be found on page 459. There has been a declaration of interest in this item, so officers who have declared an interest will be leaving the chamber. Diolch. Okay, members, we can now go back to the agenda item, but first can I just introduce Kerry Williams, who is replacing Matt today as the Law and Governance. I would say Borida, but it's actually Panaunda. Okay, Councillor Chris Cater, Cabinet Member for Audit Policy and Performance, will present this agenda item. Diolch, Councillor Chris.
Pnawn da, Cadeirydd. Yes, and welcome, Kerry. Nice to see you on the top bench. This is before us today, members, as in accordance with the requirements of sections 38 to 43 of the Localism Act 2011. A pay policy statement must be prepared and approved by the council for each financial year and published on the relevant website by the 31st of March next month. So we have this legal duty, Chair, to be completely transparent. At the date of publication of this statement, the 2024-2025 National Pay Agreements for the Chief Executive, Chief Officers, Officers' Pay and Youth and Community Workers has been agreed by the relevant joint negotiating committees. The allowances for teachers in residential establishments have also been agreed. The pay agreement for the Salisbury Officers' Education had not been agreed at the time of the report publication, Chair, but since then it has been agreed. So the 2.5% spinal column column uplift and allowances is there, and that will be added to the relevant appendices prior to the publication. So that will be done before we publish this. Council should have the opportunity to vote on salary packages of 100,000 per annum or more. There are currently 3 chief officer posts that have the potential to attract such salary packages. That is namely the chief executive and the 2 strategic directors. A review which was due in 2024 has not yet taken place owing to the extremely challenging financial situation of the authority. So part of the recommendation today, Chair, is to state that the appropriate timing for this future review should be in 2025-2026. I think we all recognise that moving forwards, there is a need to maintain market competitiveness while ensuring value for money for our taxpayer, for all of us taxpayers. The annual pay policy statement, Appendix A, is published annually on the website, along with the appendices detailing the pay scales for officers, chief officers, and the chief executive. Interestingly, the pay relativities are also set out in Appendix A. The multiple between the lowest paid full-time equivalent and the chief executive is a ratio of 1 to 5.99 in our authority. 1 to 20 is the maximum mentioned in the Hutton Fair pay review. So we're well below that. All staff grades are assessed through job evaluation, which ensures compliance with equal pay legislation. We abide by the Equality Act 2010. We will continue to improve equality outcomes through our Inclusive Conway Plan 2024-2028, which is reported on annually. And you'll remember it underwent full public consultation and democratic approval in 2024. We can have confidence that our employment policies and their applications do not result in any direct or indirect discrimination for people of any of the 9 protected characteristics. As officer pay agreements are nationally negotiated by the relevant negotiation committee, there is no scope to amend the pay policy statement. Most aspects of local pay policy are driven by national pay negotiations, which we are required to adopt locally. Therefore, we have little control or discretion over any changes. However, Chair, our recruitment project has implemented a number of key changes to our overall offer to attract good candidates for our vacancies. We have also successfully harmonised our antisocial hours payments as an equality measure. Full Council should note that this year, this report and appendices affecting staff pay has been prepared by the HR Services Manager, and it's been reviewed by the Head of People and Performance. Chair, we've just debated the 2025-26 budget this morning, and I want to thank our staff for their dedication and hard work as we aim to ensure value for money for the taxpayer, but also provide high standards and quality services. The Council is the main employer in the area, and we must be conscious of our role in improving the economic well-being of our residents. So I propose, Chair, that we as members approve the report, the pay policy statement for 2025-2026, the appendices, including the local government pension scheme discretionary pension statement, and all recommendations to ensure that the council complies with its statutory duties under the Localism Act 2011. It also part of the recommendation is that given the current financial position, the appropriate timing of a future review of the chief officer's pay should be considered during the 2025-2026. So that's following on from a previous council decision in 2024. So it just ties that off. So that's my proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chris. Okay, we've got a proposal, Councillor Chris. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Austin. Are there any questions, members? Councillor David Carr.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to ask on the senior pay that when you take the pension into account, there are more people earning over 100,000, and I think we should calculate it in that way. The other question is, do we actually get a vote on that? Do we get a vote individually, and when do we get the vote? And the third one is that I did read that the chief executive also did the elections. How much was paid for that, and was money taken off? Because obviously, if you're running an election for 4 weeks or 5 weeks, you can't be doing the job of chief executive. You can't do two jobs at the same time. So how is that calculated? Because I don't think any of that is clear. So if you can make those clear for us, I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Councillor Chris, would you like me to bring
I
you
think
in? Or...
fortunately I've got Tracy Pardo
online.
Online to answer those
Thank you, Tracy.
technicalities.
Thank you, Tracy.
Sorry, Councillor David, I didn't quite understand your question about the senior
Right,
pay.
there
More
was
than
basically three
100,000.
questions. Can I just ask them again?
Yeah,
Would that
yeah.
be easier for you? First question was, if you take pension into account, there are more than 3 people earning over 100,000. So I was questioning the way that's calculated. The second question was, do we have votes, and when do we have votes, and do we vote individually on any employees that are in over 100,000? Third question was about the general election, and if the chief executive is being paid, and how much does he be paid for the general election? You know, he's not actually chief exec. You can't do 2 jobs at the same time. You know, the best one in the world. So how is that all calculated? Because it's a bit unclear. So just to clarify those things, is that okay? Thank you.
Sorry, the salary rate is just the salary. It's not. It doesn't include the pension and the other anything else. So actually, that's why the £100,000 is set, and that's actually set by the Local Government Act. It's not something that we set. It's actually set nationally. So we're beholden to that, and that's what we comply with. As far as you getting a vote is concerned, if we were looking at anything that's over and above, then it's the independent pay master that would actually look at that. So that's external to us anyway. So that keeps that transparency really. So no, as far as an internal input is concerned, if there are things happening below that level, then actually the Senior Employment Committee will have involvement in that as well, and will be part of the decision-making process, but it will still go to the independent pay panel. So, and then as the third question, I guess when they're doing elections, usually the chief exec's doing it at night time, and he's actually working for the day. So it is just an allowance that's made. Again, it's a standard allowance. It's not a Conway allowance. It's something that's nationally agreed and paid on top of the usual salary.
Yeah, how much that is, the election?
I think we did put some figures in the actual report. Just bear with me. I'll see if I can.
So on page 474.
Yeah. Have you got my? Bear with me. Got the documents open as a separate document. So what was it? Councillor Charlie,
I have
page,
that,
front page.
so the fees for national elections are set by central government. Fees for local elections are set locally amount to £170 per contested electoral board or £55 per uncontested electoral.
There's somewhere.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a legal question here? That if the chief executive is running the election, you can't do, you're not allowed to do both jobs, are you? You wouldn't be allowed to do it, but would you?
Councillor David Carr, can you just make this your last question? You seem to be delving into something that really has already been answered.
I think the presiding, the fee is for being a presiding officer, so that's not the whole of the election process, because that's actually done and organised by a group of people internally, committees and so on, that actually pull that together. So it's him being present on the day, to be there and to make sure that everything is working. So it's not over a long period of time. So he will be still doing the job of chief exec, but in that same time.
Deal, Tracy. Okay, I'm going to call in Councillor Gronwy.
Thank you, Chair. I think the level of pay which pay our senior officers is pretty meagre compared with other officers in similar roles in different organisations. You can compare the salary of senior officers sometimes to the pay of a head teacher of schools. I'm aware that the chief officers of the fire authority is on substantially more with a much less budget. Now, we are managing £300 million budgets here, the senior officers. So I think their salary is pretty meagre compared to the responsibilities they carry.
Councillor Gronwy, any more questions, members? Okay, Councillor Simon.
Yeah, Diolch, Cadeirydd. I do notice in the supplements at the bottom that strategic directors are on 107 up to 113,000, and there's also education improvement professionals. Their scales go up to over 100,000. I take it, will those posts, if we have any paying at that rate, be coming to democracy for approval?
You, Councillor Simon. Tracy.
We don't actually have any control internally over the education payments, so that's actually done nationally. So we just pay what they tell us to pay. So we have no control over that at all. So yeah, and those pay comparisons are two separate grading systems and structures.
Thank you, Tracy.
For strategic directors, we use the Hay job evaluation process, which is slightly different to what we use for the rest of our single status staff, which is under the Greater London scheme. So, the Hay scoring system takes account of budgets and size of role, as opposed to GLPC, which is slightly different. So, but we do have a separate organisation that actually undertakes our job evaluation for those directors and chief officers.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Okay, members, we have a proposer and a seconder. If we can now go to the vote by show of hands in the chamber and on Zoom. Any against? Councillor David. And any abstentions? Members, that's being carried. Can I thank everyone for your attendance and for your participation today, and officers for their assistance. Diolch yn fawr pawb, and this meeting's closed.
Diolch.